Hi everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today's story takes us into a dark future where Jace Wren, an engineer who's been pushed aside for telling the truth, unexpectedly receives a companion unit delivery and discovers it's actually Vesper, a terrified sentient being treated like property. As they run from corporate handlers and political propaganda, they uncover a plan to legally turn refugees into chattel with a single broadcast. And the lesson hits hard. Never accept a system that dehumanizes others, because evil often hides behind polite paperwork and pretty slogans, and real courage is choosing what's right even when it costs you everything. The story also reminds us that true strength is self-control and conscience, and that love and trust must be built on consent, respect, and freedom, not ownership. In the end, the most powerful weapon isn't violence, but the truth shared bravely, plus the decision to stand beside someone as an equal. If you enjoyed this story and its message, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more English stories and life lessons. For 3 solid weeks, the air recycler in Jace Wren's apartment was making this awful, rhythmic grinding sound, like a dying robot trying to chew its way out of a cage. It was an easy fix, a 5-credit bearing and 10 minutes of work, but Jace just let it grind. He'd just lie on his bunk staring at the water stains on the ceiling that looked like a map to nowhere, and listen to the machine slowly kill itself. It felt appropriate. If the life support systems on the Kepler-9 Ark were failing, then the guy who designed them should have to listen to the death rattle. Jace swung his legs over the side of the bunk, his back cracking like a firecracker. He was only 34, but he moved like he was 70, like he'd spent the last decade hauling rocks for a living. He shuffled to the tiny kitchenette, stepping over a small mountain of dirty jumpsuits, and hit the dispenser for coffee. The machine sputtered out a lukewarm brown sludge that smelled like pond scum and burnt wires. He took a sip and winced. It was barely noon, station time, but the neon-soaked darkness outside his only window made it feel like midnight forever. Down here in Sector 12, actual sunlight was just a myth, filtered through so many layers of the upper city that it was nothing but a dim, gray memory. His comlink buzzed on the counter. Jace ignored it. Probably just another bill collector or some junk mail. Ever since the scandal, that's all he ever got. See, Jace Wren, the brilliant engineer who blew the whistle on the station's governing council for using cheap, substandard radiation shielding in the family housing sectors, wasn't exactly popular anymore. He was the guy who cost the corporation a fortune in bad press and project delays. They didn't fire him. That would have made him a hero. Instead, they just buried him alive. They moved him to a windowless office in the sub-basement, yanked his security clearance, and flagged his account so any transfer request he put in just vanished into the void. The buzzing from his comlink wouldn't stop, shifting to a ridiculously cheerful little tune. Jace slammed his coffee down and swiped the screen on. A holographic ad popped up in the stale air, showing a fuzzy blue cartoon creature with giant, soulless eyes. "Congratulations, Citizen Wren," scrolled the text beneath it. "You have been selected for the Kepler-9 Wellness and Companionship Initiative." Jace rubbed his tired eyes. Oh yeah, he remembered this vaguely. A couple nights ago, at the bottom of a bottle of cheap synth whiskey, he'd filled out a station-wide mental health survey. He'd ticked every single box that screamed misery. Insomnia? Yes. Irritability? You bet. A soul-crushing sense of existential dread? Check, check, and check. To help stabilize sleep patterns and increase productivity, the message went on. The Office of Candidate Voss is proud to sponsor a Tier 1 companion for your living unit. Delivery is en route. Jace just stared. A pet. They were sending him a pet. It was a cheap bribe, and not even a subtle one. The station election was just a month away, and Director Halden Voss was buying votes with fluffy distractions. Voss, the guy running on a platform of security and purity, was literally throwing stray animals at depressed engineers to shut them up. Great, Jace muttered to the empty apartment. Just what I need. Something else to watch die. He reached out to cancel the whole thing, but the option was grayed out. Delivery status. Arrived. A second later, his door buzzed. Jace let out a long, ragged sigh and pulled a grease-stained shirt on before walking to the door. He was expecting a little delivery drone with a kin, maybe one of those genetically engineered cats or a hypoallergenic lizard that were all the rage in the upper sectors. He hit the release. The door hissed open. The hallway was empty except for a massive crate sitting right in front of his door. Jace just blinked. The crate was huge. It was 5 feet tall, almost as wide, made of reinforced metal, and covered in heavy-duty shipping warnings. This wasn't a pet carrier. This was the kind of thing you ship a jet engine in. A couple of heavy-lift cargo drones were already zipping away down the hall. "Hey!" Jace yelled, stepping out. "You've got the wrong apartment!" The drones didn't even slow down. They just rounded a corner and were gone. Jace looked back at the crate. It was blocking half his door. A bright yellow tag was slapped on the front. It read, "Non-sentient luxury unit. Handle with care. Do not expose to direct UV." He frowned. Luxury unit? Maybe it was a really big dog. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd messed up and sent him a high-end massage chair by mistake. He grunted as he dragged the crate inside. It had to weigh 200 pounds, easy. He managed to shove it into the middle of his tiny living space. The biometric lock on the front was pulsing with a soft green light. Jace knelt down. A touchpad was waiting for his thumbprint. He paused. A weird, uneasy feeling started crawling up the back of his neck. The air around the crate felt colder, and he could hear something inside. It wasn't scratching. It was breathing. Slow, deep, hitching breaths. "Whatever you are," Jace whispered, "you better be housebroken." He pressed his thumb against the pad. The lock chirped. There was a hiss of pressurized air as the seals broke, releasing a cloud of cold, sterile-smelling nitrogen gas. The front panel clicked and swung open. Jace leaned in, waving the vapor away. And then he froze. Solid. There was no animal in there. Curled up in the padded corner of the crate was a woman. She was humanoid, but definitely not human. Her skin was the color of moonlight, pale and almost glowing. She was rail-thin, her collarbones sticking out sharply from the thin, white medical gown she was wearing. And she was trembling, racked with tiny shivers. But it was the hardware that made Jace's stomach clench. She was in chains. Heavy magnetic cuffs were locked around her wrists and ankles, connected by a short chain that forced her into a cramped crouch. Around her neck was a thick metal collar that covered her throat and lower jaw like a muzzle, blinking with tiny lights. A strip of black cloth was tied tightly around her head, covering her eyes. As the warm air of his apartment hit her, she flinched and scrambled backward, pressing herself into the corner of the crate and whipping her head from side to side in a blind panic. His brain just short-circuited. He looked down at the tag on the floor, "Non-sentient luxury unit," and then back at the terrified woman. "They promised me a pet," Jace whispered, his voice sounding small and lost. "What I got was an alien vampire woman in a box." The word vampire just popped into his head. It was some old myth he'd read as a kid, but it fit. There was something about the coiled stillness in her panic, a predator's grace, that screamed hunter. The woman made a low, whimpering sound from behind the muzzle. She tilted her head, listening. Then she spoke, her voice muffled and strange. The words were clumsy, like she was just mimicking sounds she didn't understand. "Owner, acknowledged," she rasped. A wave of sickness washed over Jace. "Do not strike the asset," she said, her voice shaking violently. "I am compliant. I am compliant." Jace scrambled backward until he hit his couch. This was a mistake. A huge, illegal, life-destroying mistake. Slavery had been outlawed centuries ago. Trafficking a sentient being was a one-way ticket to a life sentence. Yet here she was, shipped to his door like a piece of furniture. He jumped to his feet and lunged for his comlink. He had to report this, call security, explain that he ordered a puppy and they sent him a person. He frantically typed in the emergency code for sector administration. The screen flashed red. Connection denied. User account flagged for review. What? Jace yelled at the screen and jabbed it again. A calm, robotic voice filled the room. Your account is currently under probationary status, Citizen Wren. Please contact your assigned case handler. I don't have a case handler, Jace screamed. Routing to Wellness Initiative Support, the voice replied smoothly. A moment later, a chaotic audio feed crackled to life. No video, just a bored voice on the other end. Wellness Fulfillment, Dispatcher 4. What's the problem with your unit? You sent me a person! Jace yelled, pacing back and forth in his tiny apartment. There is a woman in a box in my living room. She's in chains. The dispatcher let out an audible sigh, followed by the clatter of typing. Sir, please refer to your manifest. You were approved for a Tier 1 exotic companion. That is a biological asset, legally classified as non-personnel fauna. She's talking to me, Jace shot back. She's begging me not to hit her. Mimicry, the dispatcher said, his voice dripping with boredom. They're trained to mimic vocal patterns to help with the bonding process. It's just noise, sir, like a parrot. They delivered a person in a crate, and when I tried to return her, the company told me I couldn't. I gripped the counter, my knuckles turning bone white. I want to return it, I said, my voice tight. Send your drones back, now. The dispatcher's voice was sickeningly calm. Sir, we cannot do that. The return window requires a 48-hour acclimatization period. If you reject the gift before then, you will be fined for shipping costs. A fine? For what? That'll be 3,000 credits. I didn't care about the money. Sir, the voice droned on, keep the unit calm, and do not, under any circumstances, remove the collar. It controls the serotonin inhibitors. If you take it off, it might bite. Then the line went dead. The silence in my small apartment was suddenly deafening. I looked from the dead comm link back to the shipping crate. Inside, the woman, the unit, hadn't moved an inch. She was crammed into the far corner, her body racked with violent shivers. I approached slowly, keeping my hands open and visible so she could see I meant no harm. I stopped about 3 feet away. Hey, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She flinched so hard her head smacked against the padded interior. Do not strike, she whimpered, her voice muffled by a metal muzzle. A cold, bitter anger coiled in my gut, not at her, but at the casual, bureaucratic evil that had just hung up on me. Peering inside the crate, I noticed a smaller compartment I'd missed before. I reached in and pulled out a cheap, brightly colored plastic bag. A care package. I dumped the contents on the floor, and my stomach turned. There was a red nylon leash with a tacky rhinestone handle, a bag of dried protein treats shaped like little stars, a decorative tag shaped like a bone that read, I belong to, with a blank space for a name, and a rubber ball. It had to be a sick joke. I looked at the woman. Even blindfolded, she had turned her head at the sound. She knew what those things were. Her breathing hitched, turning into ragged, terrified gasps. She recognized the leash. She tried to shrink even further into the corner, as if the leash were a hot poker. That is it, I muttered. That was the last straw. I grabbed my tool belt from the workshop table, pulling out a laser cutter and a pair of heavy-duty mag keys. I knelt right in front of her. She went completely rigid, her muscles locking up, clearly expecting a blow. Stay still, I said, my own voice shaking with rage. I'm going to get this garbage off of you. I started with the collar. It was a complex piece of junk, but I used to build airlocks for orbital stations. I know my way around a pressure seal. I tuned the laser cutter to a high frequency and sliced clean through the locking pin on her muzzle. With a soft hiss and a click, the muzzle fell apart. The woman gasped. sucking in a deep, ragged breath of air as if it were her first. Her face was all sharp angles and high cheekbones, hauntingly beautiful and trembling with fear. She didn't say a word, just breathed and breathed. Next, the cuffs. They were standard-issue mag locks. I slid a bypass key into the slot, gave it a twist, and the magnets disengaged with a dull thud. The chains clattered to the floor. She slowly brought her hands to her chest, rubbing her wrists. The skin was bruised a dark, ugly purple where the metal had dug into her flesh. "Okay," I said gently. "The blindfold." I reached up, and this time, she didn't pull away, though every muscle in her body was tense. I found the knot and worked it loose. As the black cloth fell away, I felt my own breath catch in my throat. Her eyes were enormous. The irises were a swirling, bottomless black that seemed to drink the light in the room. But encircling that darkness was a thin, glowing ring of crimson. They were the eyes of a predator, something that hunted in the deep dark. She blinked rapidly, tears streaming down her face as she hissed in pain from the dim apartment lights, raising a hand to shield her face. When she hissed, her lips pulled back from her teeth, and I saw them. Fangs. And not the cosmetic kind you see in the clubs on level 4. These were real, retractable, and needle-sharp, sliding down from her upper gums. They looked like spun glass, with a hollow channel running right through the middle. I should have been terrified. There was a predator sitting in my living room, completely unbound. But all I saw was how badly she was shaking, her skin slick with a cold sweat. She curled into herself, clutching her stomach. "Please," she whispered, her voice melodic but strained. "Please, the hunger. It hurts." I scrambled to my feet. "I have food!" I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a nutrient bar and a pouch of rehydrated fruit, and rushed back. "Here, protein, sugar," I offered. She sniffed the air and recoiled violently, turning her face away. "No," she rasped. "Ash. It smells like ash." Her star-dark eyes widened as she looked at me. No, not at me. At my neck. She could hear my pulse, a frantic hammering against my ribs, and in that moment, I knew she could hear it too. "You need blood," I said. It wasn't a question. She gave a tiny, shameful nod, trying to crawl back into the crate. "No feeding without permission," she chanted like a broken machine. "I am a good asset." "Stop calling yourself that," I snapped. I raced to the bathroom, tearing open the emergency med kit. Inside was a packet of synthetic plasma, the kind used for rapid transfusions. It was red, viscous, and universally compatible. I ran back, ripped the top off the packet, and held it out. "Drink this!" She lunged, desperation wiping away all her training. Her grip on my wrist was like a steel clamp. She brought the packet to her nose, her whole body trembling, and then she froze. She shoved my hand away so hard the packet flew across the room, splattering the floor with red fluid. "Dead water!" she cried, her voice cracking with despair. "It's dead! There's no life in it! It doesn't sing!" She collapsed forward, her forehead hitting the floor as she broke into heart-wrenching sobs. "I'll die," she wept. "Please don't send me back to the dark box. I'll be good. I won't bite deep. Just a little. Please." I just stood there, my hand dripping with fake blood, looking at this broken person begging for a piece of me just to survive. This wasn't just trafficking. It was torture. They starved her, caged her, and shipped her off with a bag of dog treats. My fear was burned away by a cold, sharp rage. It was the anger of a builder who sees a structure that is fundamentally, morally wrong. "I am not sending you back," I said, my voice low and steady. I knelt beside her, placing a hand on her freezing shoulder. "We are going to figure this out." Suddenly, every light in the apartment flared to maximum brightness. The woman screamed, covering her eyes. I squinted up at the ceiling. The small taped-over surveillance camera in the corner had swiveled towards us. A red light was blinking. On my wall screen, a message flashed in huge, aggressive letters. "Alert! Unauthorized asset unlocking detected. Compliance officers dispatched. Estimated time of arrival, 5 minutes. They were watching. The whole time. The crate, I realized aloud. It must have sent a signal when I cut the collar. I looked at the woman. She was rocking back and forth, muttering in a language I'd never heard. "Get up," I said, hauling her to her feet. She was terrifyingly light, but I could feel the coiled power in her frame. "They're coming," she whispered. "The handlers." I shook my head. "Not if we're not here." I snatched a heavy gray rain cloak from a hook by the door and threw it over her, pulling the hood up to shield her sensitive eyes. "Can you walk?" She nodded, her crimson-ringed eyes wide with fear, and something else. Resolve. "I can run." I grabbed my datapad and my toolkit. The main corridor was a death trap. Facial scanners would flag us in a second. "Not that way," I muttered, heading to a maintenance panel in the back wall. I popped the latches with my mag key, revealing a dark, narrow service tunnel filled with pipes. It smelled of ozone and recycled water. "I helped build this section," I said, mostly to myself. "I know the blind spots." I climbed inside and gestured for her to follow. She moved like a shadow, slipping into the darkness without a sound. We crawled for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes. The tunnel opened onto a walkway suspended high above the station's massive geothermal pits. I stood up, wiping grease from my hands. "We need to get to the lower docks. I know a guy." But she wasn't listening. She had frozen, her head tilted, the hood falling back to reveal a pointed ear swiveling like a radar dish. "What is it?" I whispered. "They're not just coming for us," she said, her voice grim. "They're coming for you." "Did you hear that? The motors?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on something spinning in the shadows above. Jace listened, but all he could hear was the low drone of the station's air recyclers. "Where?" he mouthed. She pointed up. High in the vaulted, gloomy ceiling, a shape detached itself from a thick nest of cables. A security drone. It was a deadly, teardrop-shaped machine armed with stun cannons and containment nets. It hadn't spotted them, yet. Its sensors were methodically scanning the walkway about 50 feet behind them. "Run!" Jace hissed, and they bolted. His heavy boots hammered against the metal grating, but the woman beside him was a ghost, her bare feet making absolutely no sound. A siren blared behind them. The drone had a lock. "Stop, Citizen Wren!" an amplified voice boomed. "Halt immediately!" The command echoed through the massive, empty space. A crackling bolt of blue energy shot past Jace's head, slamming into the railing and sending a shower of sparks everywhere. He instinctively ducked and stumbled. A second blast hit the floor right where he'd been, the impact knocking him off his feet. He hit the grating hard, the air forced from his lungs. Gasping, he rolled onto his back just in time to see the drone diving straight for him like a bird of prey, its stun cannon glowing bright for the final shot. Jace threw his arms up, bracing himself for the inevitable. But then, a gray blur shot between him and the machine. It was the woman. She had leaped, an unbelievable jump, launching herself 10 feet straight up from a dead stop to collide with the drone in midair. She wrapped her legs around its body, but she wasn't trying to smash it. She was taking it apart. Her hands moved in a flurry, tearing at its sensor array, ripping out wires with a strength that was terrifying to watch. The drone spun out of control, its rotors screaming like a dying animal. She kicked off it, performing a perfect backflip to land in a low crouch next to Jace. The crippled machine slammed into a far wall and then tumbled into the deep, dark pit below. For a moment, there was only silence. Jace just stared at her. She was breathing heavily, her fangs were fully visible, and her eyes were glowing with adrenaline. She looked like a predator, a killer. And then she just broke. She fell to her knees, pressed her forehead to the grimy floor, and held her hands out, wrists together, as if waiting to be handcuffed. "I damaged the equipment," she whispered, her voice shaking with pure terror. "I'm so sorry. Please don't punish me. I just reacted. I'm a bad asset." Jace slowly pushed himself up. The sharp smell of burnt ozone from the drone filled the air. He looked at this woman who had just saved his life, and she was apologizing for it, convinced that the simple act of survival was a crime. He got to his feet, his own legs unsteady. He reached down for her. She flinched, obviously expecting him to hit her. But Jace just took her hand. He didn't yank her up. He just held it, his thumb gently brushing against her bruised wrist. "You're not an asset," Jace said, his voice quiet but firm. "You're a person, and you just saved my life." She looked up, and for a second the confusion in her eyes almost outweighed the fear. Jace glanced down the walkway. That path led to the old, abandoned transport tunnels. It led away from his apartment, his job, away from the tiny scrap of a normal life he had left. Taking that path would make him a fugitive. They would hunt him. He would lose everything. He looked back the way they came, toward the distant lights of the civilized upper levels. "Come on," Jace said, his decision made. "We have to go." He gently pulled her to her feet. She was swaying, weak from hunger, but she didn't let go of his hand. She looked from the dark tunnel to Jace's face. He could see she didn't trust him, that she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, but the drone was gone. Her collar was off. And he was holding her hand like it was something precious, not like something he'd bought. "I will follow," she whispered. Jace gave a single, firm nod. "Let's go!" They turned and ran together into the darkness, leaving the constant hum of the station far behind. The old service tram clattered along the station's spine, taking them deeper into the forgotten sectors of Kepler 9. Jace watched the digital signs flicker as they passed through powerful magnetic fields. Beside him, the woman, Vesper, sat huddled on the floor, her knees tucked into her chest, wrapped in an oversized rain-cloak that made her look like a small pile of gray laundry. They got off at Sector 14, a place once meant for farming that had been abandoned after budget cuts 5 years ago. Jace pried open a rusted maintenance hatch, and they slipped into the eerie silence of Dome 3. It was a giant, abandoned greenhouse, a huge bubble of transparent aluminum sticking out from the side of the station. The air was thick and humid, smelling of damp soil and slow decay. The grow lights above were all dead, but the dome was filled with a soft, ethereal glow from the galaxy outside and from the bioluminescent algae that had completely taken over the old water tanks. It cast a gentle, teal light on everything, making the place look haunted and beautiful. Vesper slowly lowered her hood. Her eyes went wide as she stared up at the stars through the grimy dome. The strange light seemed to calm her. "Is this your place?" she asked, her voice a soft hush. "No," Jace said, kicking an old bucket out of the way to clear a spot on a bench. "It's just a place nobody cares about anymore, kind of like me." He pulled a thermal blanket from his pack, a standard-issue silver and orange emergency foil, and shook it out. The crinkling sound was loud in the quiet dome. "Here," he said, holding it out. "You're shivering." Vesper looked at the blanket, but didn't take it right away. She stood a little taller and wiped her palms on her simple dress. She approached it carefully, almost reverently, taking the corners gently. She draped it over her shoulders with the kind of graceful, precise movements you'd expect from a queen. Then she bowed her head slightly to Jace. "I accept this gift of protection," she said formally. "I will see that it is returned to you clean." Jace blinked, caught off guard. It's just a blanket, Vesper. It costs 4 credits at a vending machine. You don't have to bow." She just looked at him, confused. "But it is warm," she said simply. "In the shipping crate, it was always cold. Warmth is a great gift." Jace felt that old, familiar anger twisting in his gut, anger at whatever monsters had done this to her. He turned away, pretending to search his bag so she wouldn't see his face. He pulled out a protein bar and handed it to her. "Eat," he said, his voice a little rough. "I know it's not what you need, but it might help." Vesper accepted the bar. She sniffed it, her nose wrinkling in disgust. She stared at the dense brown brick with extreme suspicion. "It smells of dust," she said. Is this a punishment? A short, humorless laugh escaped Jace's lips. It's chocolate peanut butter flavor. So yeah, basically. She took a tiny bite, chewed it for a long time, and swallowed as if it were a rock. It has no life, she whispered. She sat on the bench, pulling the silver blanket tighter. My people, we don't just eat for fuel. We eat for connection. Blood isn't just a liquid. It holds the memories, the chemistry, of the thing that lived. It balances our minds, she continued. Without it, the static in my head gets louder. The lights get brighter. Jace sat on a crate across from her. Tell me about the lights. The shipping manifest said you were a vampire. Vesper went rigid. That is their word, a word from your children's stories to make them fear the dark. We are the Solari. We come from a world that circles a red dwarf star, a twilight world. Our eyes are built to see in near darkness, your yellow sun. It's not just bright to us. It's pure radiation. It overloads our senses. It burns us from the inside. Jace rubbed his tired face. So the whole vampire thing is just branding? It's politics, Vesper corrected, her dark eyes boring into his. If we are classified as people, we have rights. If we are refugees, the station is required to help us. But if we are monsters, if we are vampires, then we are nothing more than dangerous animals. And dangerous animals can be put in cages. They can be sold. She gestured around the empty dome. The companionship initiative you signed up for. It's a lie. It's a scheme to launder living beings. Jace leaned in, his heart pounding. Laundering? There was a treaty, Vesper explained, pushed through by politicians funded by a corporation called Heliogene. They changed my species' official status from sentient non-citizen to Class 4 biological hazard. Suddenly it was illegal for us to simply exist unless we were sponsored assets. They sell us to fund their political campaigns, and they use the fear of us to win elections. Jace just stared at her. He knew station politics were dirty. He'd lost his own career trying to expose it. But this was evil on an industrial scale. He pictured the smiling, friendly mascot from the program on his screen. We have to get you out of here, Jace said, his voice low and urgent. Not just off this station. We have to get you out of the Kepler system entirely. Vesper looked down at her hands. There is nowhere to go. The handler told me I'm tagged. Jace stood. The freight shuttle's on the lower ring. They're not as strict with their biological scans. We can try there. He helped her up. As she stood, the blanket caught on something at her neck. Jace heard a tiny noise. It wasn't the crinkle of the foil blanket. It was a soft, rhythmic pinging sound, almost too faint to hear. Wait. Stop, Jace ordered. Vesper froze. What is it? That sound, Jace whispered. He leaned in, listening intently. The sound was coming from her neck, from a thin metal band hidden just beneath the line of her jaw. He hadn't even noticed it before in the dim light. It was flush against her skin, almost invisible. Hold perfectly still, Jace said, pressing his ear close to the band. Ping, ping, ping. It's a heartbeat, Vesper whispered, her eyes growing wide with a new kind of horror. A metal heartbeat. It wasn't just a collar, Jace realized, a sudden chill washing over him. It was a beacon. The moment the main lock was broken, it activated. They know our exact location. He fumbled for his toolkit. I have to get this thing off you right now. He powered up the laser cutter. Vesper leaned her head back, offering her throat in a gesture of terrifying, absolute trust. Jace's hands were rock steady. He was an engineer. Panic just sharpened his focus. He aimed the beam at the collar's seam. 1 second, 2 seconds. The metal gave way with a snap. Jace ripped the band off and hurled it across the room. A piercing siren immediately started screaming, not from the collar, but from the station's overhead speakers. Alert! Asset recovery protocol initiated. Sector 14 lockdown in progress. All citizens are ordered to shelter in place." At the far end of the greenhouse, massive blast doors began to rumble shut. "Run!" Jace screamed. They bolted for the exit. The thick steel doors were coming down with the slow, unstoppable force of a hydraulic press. Jace didn't even hesitate. He grabbed Vesper's hand and they dove, sliding under the shrinking gap with only inches to spare. They tumbled out into the corridor just as the doors slammed down with a deafening boom that vibrated through the floor. They were in an access tunnel that led to the market district. "They're sealing the whole sector," Jace said, scrambling to his feet. "We have to get into the public zones. They won't just open fire in a crowd." Vesper pulled the hood of her cloak down to hide her face. "I'm ready." They burst from the quiet of the maintenance tunnels straight into the overwhelming chaos of the Grand Market. It was like a canyon carved from neon lights, shimmering holographic ads, and a sea of people. The air was a thick mix of fried noodles, the sharp smell of ozone, and unwashed bodies. Thousands of people shuffled through the tight alleyways between vendor stalls that sold everything from second-hand tech to synthetic spices. Jace kept a firm grip on Vesper's arm, guiding her through the crowd. "Keep your head down," he whispered. "Just act normal. We're just a couple out shopping." They made it maybe 50 yards before their luck ran out. A delivery drone, rushing to its next drop-off, clipped Vesper on the shoulder. She stumbled and spun around. The worn gray hood of her cloak caught on a display hook at a stall selling antique jewelry. The hood was torn clean off her head. For a heartbeat, no one seemed to notice. Then a woman nearby let out a sharp scream. Vesper was frozen, caught in the harsh white glare of a holographic ad. Her pale skin seemed to almost glow. Her eyes were wide, the crimson rings around her irises flaring brightly. In her panic, she let out a hiss, her fangs descending fully, glistening under the artificial lights. "Vampire!" someone yelled. But the crowd didn't run away. They pulled back, creating a sudden, silent circle around them. Hundreds of eyes were locked on Vesper. Phones and data pads were already being raised, their camera lights flashing. "It's a monster! It got loose!" "Somebody call the marshals!" The security drones hovering above swiveled, their searchlights sweeping over the crowd. Jace could see the raw terror etched on Vesper's face. She looked like she was about to lash out, to fight back, which would be a death sentence. He had to change the story, and fast. He couldn't take on an entire market. Jace boldly stepped into the middle of the circle. He threw his arms out wide, trying to look like a showman. "Behold!" he shouted, his voice cracking with a desperate energy he didn't know he had. "The magnificent beast of the Outer Rim!" The crowd hesitated, a ripple of confusion spreading through them. Jace turned to Vesper and gave her a huge, dramatic wink. "Tamed by the one and only Jace Wren. Watch as she bends to my will." He pointed a commanding finger at her. "Down, creature! Save that ferocity for the main stage." Vesper stared back at him for a split second, pure bewilderment in her eyes. But then she saw the frantic desperation in his expression. She got it. She didn't shrink away. Instead, she stood up to her full height, let out an over-the-top theatrical hiss at the crowd that was more performance than threat, and dropped into a low crouch. "Terrifying, isn't she?" Jace yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward a stall covered in bright fabrics. "Come see the full show at the Midnight Theater. Tickets are on sale now. Make way for the dangerous beast." The confusion bought them about 10 precious seconds. The crowd parted, unsure if they were witnessing a genuine threat or some kind of bizarre pop-up advertisement. Jace dragged Vesper through the opening they had created, diving behind the clothing racks of a costume vendor. They scrambled out the back of the booth, sending a mannequin dressed like a space pirate crashing to the ground, and disappeared into the maze of service alleys behind the market stalls. They didn't stop running until they hit a dead-end loading bay 3 levels down. Vesper finally collapsed against a large crate of hydraulic fluid. She slid to the grimy floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "The great Jace Wren," she wheezed, a strange, choked sound bubbling up from her throat. It might have been a laugh, but it was coated in hysteria. It was the best I could come up with, Jace panted, leaning against the wall and clutching a painful stitch in his side. Vesper tried to get up, but her legs gave out from under her. She crumpled to the floor. Vesper! Jace dropped to his knees beside her. She was shaking, her body caught in a series of violent tremors. Her skin had turned a sickly gray color, losing its pearlescent glow. Her eyes were rolling back in her head, showing only the whites. Too much light, she gasped out. Too much energy. The hunger. It's burning me up. She curled into a tight ball, clutching her stomach. A low, guttural growl rumbled in her chest, not a sound of aggression, but the sound of an engine running on empty. She was starving. The adrenaline from the chase had burned through the last of her reserves. Jace looked at her, and he knew. She was dying. He could see her body literally consuming itself just to stay alive. He looked down at his own hands, at the grime under his nails and the old scars from years of fixing machines. Vesper, he said softly. She just shook her head, squeezing her eyes shut. No. No dead water. No dead water. I don't have any, Jace said, his voice quiet. He sat on the floor beside her. He unsealed the cuff of his jumpsuit and pushed the sleeve up, revealing the pale, soft skin of his inner wrist. The veins were a map of blue lines under the harsh fluorescent lights. Vesper, Jace said again. Drink. Her eyes snapped open. She stared at his wrist. The smell of him, the salt from his sweat, the iron in his blood pumping just beneath the surface, hit her like a physical force. Her pupils expanded until her eyes were almost completely black. No, she whispered, her voice cracking. I can't. You're not... I don't own you. No, you don't, Jace agreed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This is my choice. Do you understand me? I am saying yes. She was trembling, her hand hovering just above his arm. If you don't, Jace said, fighting to keep his voice from shaking, you won't be able to walk, and we'll both be caught. So just take it. But Vesper was looking at his face. If I tell you to stop, you have to stop. Immediately. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I swear. She reached out. Her fingers were like ice against his warm skin. She didn't grab him violently. She held his wrist as gently as if she were holding a soap bubble. She lifted his arm to her mouth. She paused, and her breath hitching in her throat. Then she kissed his skin, a soft, apologetic touch of her lips. And then she bit down. Jace flinched, sucking in a sharp breath through his teeth. It was a sharp, piercing sting as her fangs broke the skin, but just as quickly the pain was gone. In its place, a wave of warmth spread from his wrist, up his arm, and washed over his entire body like warm honey. His vision started to blur around the edges, the dirty loading bay, the fear, the distant sound of sirens. It all faded into a gentle, humming background noise. It felt like that perfect, heavy moment right before you fall asleep, when nothing in the world matters. He looked down. Vesper's eyes were closed. She wasn't drinking frantically. She was taking slow, rhythmic draws, perfectly in time with his own pulse. A deep sense of calm settled over him. But beneath the calm, there was something else. A connection. He could feel her fear melting away, being replaced by a fierce, golden wave of gratitude. He could feel her relief, and it wasn't just physical. It was like they were sharing emotions. For a second, he wasn't Jace Wren, the disgraced engineer. He was an anchor. He was a source of life. It was terrifying, and it was the most intimate thing he had ever experienced. Jace, he heard himself whisper, his voice sounding like it was coming from miles away. Vesper's hand tightened slightly on his arm. She made a soft noise deep in her throat. Stop, Jace said. The word felt heavy, difficult to form. Stop. Vesper pulled back instantly. She scrambled away from him, wiping her mouth on the back of her hand. Her chest was still rising and falling rapidly, but her color was back. The sickly gray was gone, replaced by a healthy, pearlescent sheen. She looked at him with wide, horrified eyes, as if she had just committed a terrible crime. Jace let his head fall back against the wall, the world slowly swimming back into focus. He pressed his other hand over the 2 tiny puncture marks on his wrist. They were already starting to clot. "Are you okay?" he asked. She just stared at him. You liked it." Jace blinked. "What?" "You felt the bond?" Vesper whispered. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking back and forth. "I felt you feel it. The calm, the warmth. Is that, normal?" Jace asked, his voice still hoarse. "It's how we survive," Vesper said, her voice dripping with shame. "Our saliva. It has a neurotoxin in it, a mild one. It kills the pain. It releases endorphins. It creates a feeling of affection." She finally looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. "It's why the traffickers use us. They don't just put us in chains. They make us feed from our handlers. The handlers get addicted to the feeling. The assets get addicted to feeling safe. It's a chemical lie. It guarantees we'll obey. I didn't mean to use it on you. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Jace looked down at his wrist. He could still feel a ghost of that warmth. It was dangerously tempting. He could easily see how a cruel man like Voss, or any corporate handler, could get hooked on that feeling of absolute power and manufactured adoration. He pushed himself upright, shaking the fog from his mind. "Hey," he said, his voice firm. "Look at me." When Vesper finally met his eyes, he laid down the law. "We're not doing that. I'm not your keeper, and you are not my pet. What happened back there wasn't you obeying an order. That was just dinner. I know what they told you, that it's just biology, just chemistry, but it doesn't mean you own me, and it sure doesn't mean I own you. So we're setting some rules. Rule 1, you only feed when I give you the word. Rule 2, when I say stop, you stop, no questions asked. And Rule 3, and this is the most important one, you have the right to say no to anything else. You got that?" Vesper just stared at him, the deep shame on her face slowly melting away, replaced by a delicate sense of wonder. "Rule 3, she repeated softly. "I can say no." "Yes," Jace confirmed. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I accept your terms." "Good." Jace pushed himself to his feet, feeling a bit dizzy but otherwise okay. "Now we need to find a way off this station." The main freight shuttles were a no-go. The docks were on total lockdown. Vesper rose too, her movements suddenly sharp and graceful again. "There is another way," she said, her voice low. "But it's dangerous. We'll need a ship from a pilot who doesn't ask questions." "I know someone," Jace said. "A pilot who owes me a favor, but she's going to charge us at least triple." "Why does she owe you?" "I did an off-the-books repair on her atmospheric scrubbers while she was hauling some illegal cargo," Jace admitted. "She smuggles things like luxury goods, real coffee, silks, that kind of stuff." Vesper's gaze was intense. "And people?" Jace paused. "I really hope not." "Her name is Mara Kest." He pulled out his comlink, bypassing the official station channels to tune into a dead-drop frequency. "Kest," he spoke into the device. "It's Wren. I'm cashing in that favor. I need a pickup at the old mining platform in Sector 0. Now." A blast of static crackled, then a woman's voice, raspy and amused, came through. "Well, well, Jace Wren, the dome guy. I thought you were busy being depressed these days." "I'm busy being a fugitive," Jace shot back. "I've got cargo. Hot cargo." "How hot are we talking?" "Surface of the sun, hot." The voice on the other end laughed. My favorite temperature. I'll be there in 20. Bring your credits. Jace cut the connection. We have to move, he urged. Sector 0 is a bit of a climb. Wait, Vesper said, grabbing his arm. Before we go, you need to understand why they're hunting me this hard. It's not just about the election. What else is there? I told you I was a witness, Vesper said, her voice barely a whisper. I wasn't just some random person they captured. I was a servant in the High Court of the Twilight Worlds. I was in the room when they signed the deal. What deal? The treaty amendment, Vesper explained. Heliogene didn't just pay for the right to sell my people. They traded a cure. Jace froze. A cure for what? The Grey Rot, Vesper said, the name of the plague that was devastating the outer colonies hanging in the air. Heliogene created a vaccine, but they never released it to the public. They traded it to the traitorous lords of my world in exchange for, biological assets. My people, she clarified, her voice shaking with rage, were sold to save your people from a plague that Heliogene probably engineered in the first place. Jace just stared at her, his mind reeling. If that was true, if she had proof, it wouldn't just topple the government. It would burn Heliogene to the ground. You're the proof, he realized aloud. I am the witness, Vesper confirmed. If I testify, their whole corrupt regime falls. That's why they sent the handlers. They don't want me back as a pet, Jace. They want to silence me for good. A cold dread washed over him. This had just escalated from helping a runaway to being at the center of a galactic conspiracy. Okay, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his head. That changes things. We're not just running anymore. We're carrying a bomb. They moved quickly, using the shadows of the massive ventilation shafts for cover. It took them a full hour to reach Sector 0, a long-dead mining rig that clung to the station's underside like a metal barnacle. The area was exposed to the void, with only flickering magnetic shields holding the vacuum at bay. A ship was waiting for them, an ugly, lopsided thing covered in mismatched hull plates, looking like a patchwork quilt made of scrap metal. The lopsided comet. A ramp lowered, and a woman stood at the top, a heavy blaster pistol resting casually on her hip. She had vibrant blue hair and a smirk that screamed trouble. Jace Wren, Mara Kest called out. You look like hell. Who's your spooky friend? This is Vesper, Jace said, guiding her up the ramp. Mara gave Vesper a quick once-over. Nice hood. Is she the hot cargo? She's the passenger, Jace said urgently. We have to go. Now! But before Mara could reply, the air in the docking bay seemed to ripple. 3 figures shimmered into view, deactivating their camouflage fields by the airlock. They were decked out in sleek, unmarked black tactical armor. Heliogene containment squads. Target acquired, one of them said, his voice distorted by a mechanical amplifier. Mara cursed, raising her blaster. You brought friends, Wren! I didn't know, Jace yelled, pulling Vesper behind him. The lead soldier leveled a stun rifle. Hand over the asset. Lethal force is authorized for all collaborators. Mara opened fire. A searing red energy bolt slammed into the soldier's chest plate, but he barely flinched. Get on the ship! Mara yelled, backing up the ramp. Jace grabbed Vesper's arm, but the second soldier was already on them, lunging forward with a crackling shock baton. He swung at Jace, who threw up an arm to block, bracing for the agony of shattered bones. But the blow never came. Vesper moved. This wasn't the desperate, panicked struggle from the greenhouse. This was pure, lethal precision. She stepped inside the soldier's reach, seized his wrist, and twisted. A sickening crunch echoed as his ceramic armor shattered. The soldier screamed, but Vesper was already moving, using his momentum to hurl him into the third attacker. She flowed like smoke, a blur of motion. She ducked under a rifle butt, swept the lead soldier's legs out from under him, and drove her palm into his helmet, cracking the visor clean in 2. She wasn't a pet. She was a weapon. In less than 3 seconds, 2 soldiers were down, and the third was stumbling backward, his rifle bent at an impossible angle. Vesper hissed, her fangs bared, standing over the fallen soldiers like a wrathful goddess. Mara's jaw was on the floor. "Where in the stars did you find a combat droid in a dress?" Jace stared, completely stunned. The terror was gone from Vesper's face, replaced by a cold, deadly focus. She sprinted up the ramp. "We must fly!" she commanded. Jace and Mara scrambled after her, and the airlock hissed shut. "Go, go, go!" Jace shouted. The engines of the lopsided comet roared to life. The ship lurched away from the dock, spinning out into the blackness just as more soldiers swarmed into the bay. Inside the cockpit, Mara was already punching in hyperdrive coordinates. The stars outside stretched into thin lines of light, and they were gone. Mara spun her pilot's chair around. "All right, Ren, start talking, now. That was no pet. That was a full-blown ninja." Jace looked over at Vesper. She was huddled in a corner of the bridge, the adrenaline leaving her, making her look small and scared all over again. "She used to be a servant in a royal court," Jace said quietly. "I guess the court had guards." Vesper looked at the floor. "I watched them train. Remember things. Muscle memory." Just then, Jace's comlink chirped with a station-wide emergency alert. He glanced at the screen, and all the color drained from his face. "What is it?" Mara asked. Jace turned the screen so they could both see. A holographic wanted poster was being broadcast to every screen in the sector. It showed a grainy security image of Jace running through the market, next to a twisted, terrifying picture of Vesper hissing at her captors. The text below read, "Wanted for kidnapping and biological terrorism. Jace Wren, armed and dangerous. Accompanied by feral Class 4 blood asset. Do not approach. Shoot on sight. Bounty, 50,000 credits." Mara let out a low whistle. 50,000. Well, Wren, you're finally worth something. Vesper stared at the monstrous image of herself. "They've turned the entire world into a cage," she whispered. "Then we'll just have to break the bars," Jace said, though he had no clue how they would even start. He looked out at the star-streaked void. They had escaped the station, but the galaxy had just become a much smaller and far more dangerous place. The lopsided comet dropped out of hyperspace with a sound like a toolbox being kicked down a flight of metal stairs. The sudden deceleration slammed Jace into his seat, forcing the air from his lungs before the ship's groaning gravity stabilizers kicked in. "We're here," Mara announced from the pilot's seat. "Welcome to the Rusty Halo. Try not to get an infection just from looking at it." Jace unstrapped himself and leaned forward. The Rusty Halo wasn't a station. It was a wound carved into the sector. Tucked inside a dense ring of debris from a shattered moon, the outpost was a chaotic jumble of old ship hulls, hollowed-out asteroids, and pressurized tunnels all lashed together. It looked like a junkyard had gained consciousness and decided to start a society based on terrible life choices. "It's crowded," Vesper noted. She was standing behind Jace's chair, gripping the headrest so tightly her knuckles were white. "It's a hive of scum and villainy," Mara corrected, spinning her chair around. "But mostly scum. The folks here size you up for profit before they even say hello. We need to watch our backs." Jace glanced at Vesper. She was still wearing the gray cloak, but they'd tried to disguise her. Mara had dug up a pair of dark welding goggles to hide her unique, star-dark eyes and the crimson rings that appeared when she was stressed. They'd tied her hair back, and Jace had smeared a bit of grease on her cheek to break up the flawless porcelain symmetry of her face. It didn't really help. Even in a baggy mechanic's jumpsuit, Vesper carried herself with the straight-backed posture of a queen. She didn't fidget or slouch. She moved with a fluid, liquid grace that screamed either royalty or highly trained assassin. "You need to hunch over," Jace said, getting up to demonstrate. "Act like life is weighing you down, like you owe somebody money." Vesper tried to slump her shoulders. She looked like a noble statue trying to imitate a melting candle. "I'm trying," she whispered. "But my body remembers the court." Good posture was about survival. To slouch was to show weakness. Around here, looking like you belong is how you survive. But slouching just makes you another target. Mara always said, Being weak is one thing. Being rich is what gets you killed. Our ship docked with a greasy mechanical arm sticking out from the station's main hub. As the airlock hissed open, the smell hit us like a punch to the face. A thick wall of ozone, fried circuits, stale coolant, and sweat. I double-checked the heavy magnetic pistol Mara had given me. It felt clumsy in my hands. I build things. I don't break people. Stay close, I mumbled to Vesper, and let me handle the talking. As we stepped onto the gangway and into the main concourse, the roar of the crowd was absolutely deafening. Vendors were screaming, engines were roaring, and the bass from a nearby cantina was so heavy you could feel it in your teeth. Vesper jumped at every sudden sound, her small hand grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. Our mission was simple: find a data broker. Mara, of course, knew a guy for everything. This guy's name was Kale, and he worked out of a back room in a fusion coil repair shop. While we pushed our way through the crowded market, dodging hulking Draxian mercenaries and miners with glowing cybernetics, Mara decided it was the perfect time for a cultural lesson. "You're way too stiff, Vesper," Mara whispered, not very quietly. "You gotta loosen up. Learn the lingo." "I've already downloaded the standard trade language package," Vesper whispered back, her voice tight. No, not the official stuff," Mara insisted. "The slang. If someone gets in your face, you need to sound like you bite." "Teach me," Vesper said, with total seriousness. A wicked grin spread across Mara's face. "Okay. If a stranger gets too close, the proper greeting is, 'Spin on it, void kisser.' And if you want to agree to a deal," she continued, "you say, 'I'm down to clown.'" I let out a groan. "Mara, please don't teach the alien princess to say she's down to clown." "Hey, it's idiomatic," Mara shot back. We finally reached the repair shop. A massive security droid blocked the entrance, its single red optical sensor scanning us. "State your business," it buzzed. Before I could say a word, Vesper stepped forward. She gave a slight, formal bow, her voice perfectly polite. "Greetings, esteemed metal construct. We are here to see Kale. I am down to clown." The droid's internal processors whirred for a long, silent moment of pure confusion. I slapped a hand over my face. Then the droid stepped aside. "Kale is expecting you." "See?" Mara whispered, elbowing me. "Universal language." Kale was a tiny man with cybernetic eyes that were constantly zooming in and out like camera lenses. He sat behind a desk buried under a mountain of memory chips and half-eaten noodle containers. He listened to our request, his eyes never blinking as he talked about scrubbing our fake IDs and decrypting the shipping manifest. "I can do the scrub, no problem," Kale said, his voice raspy like sandpaper. "And I can crack the crate's history, but the encryption on that shipping tag, that's diplomatic grade. That's some heavy lifting. It's going to take a lot of processing power that I don't just give away for credits." "So what do you want?" I asked. Kale leaned forward, his mechanical eyes focusing on me. "Information. There's a heliogene lab barge docked in the outer ring. It's almost fully automated, barely any crew. They're moving a prototype data wafer, claiming it's a new farming algorithm. I think it's something a lot more valuable. You bring me that wafer, I'll unlock your crate." "A heist," I said flatly. "You want us to rob a corporate black site?" "A trade," Kale corrected. "You've got an engineer, you've got a pilot." He glanced at Vesper, his lenses whirring. "And you've got whatever she is." "We'll do it," Vesper said, her voice like ice. I stared at her, stunned. "Vesper, we need to know who signed the order," she said, her voice hard as steel. "We need to know who sold me." We spent the next 6 hours planning the job on our ship, the lopsided Comet. I pored over the schematics of the lab barge while Mara got the sensor jamming frequencies ready. Vesper just sat alone in the cargo hold, methodically sharpening a piece of scrap metal she'd found. I went and sat down next to her. "You don't have to do this," I said quietly. "We can find another way, another broker." "No," Vesper said without looking up from her work. "This is the only way. I have to know who my enemy is." She paused, then slowly lowered the zipper on her jumpsuit just an inch. She pulled the fabric aside, revealing her ribcage. There, scarred into her pale skin just below her heart, was a brand. It wasn't some corporate barcode. It was a complex, swirling design that looked like a tiny, stylized nebula. "The mark of the silent witness," Vesper said softly. "You told me you were part of the royal court," I said. "I was," she confirmed. "But I wasn't a ruler. I was a witness. In my culture, every royal decree, every single treaty, has to be observed by a chosen few. We're trained to have perfect recall, every word, every hesitation. We are living archives." She gently touched the scar. "I was in the chamber when the coup happened," she whispered. "The traitor lords from the Twilight Worlds. They needed money for weapons. Heliogene gave them billions of credits. In exchange, the lords signed an amendment to the treaty. They reclassified all refugees as livestock. I saw the papers being signed. I saw the money transfer." "So that's why they want you," I realized. "You're not just a loose end. You're the recording." "I am the only one left who saw it all happen," Vesper said. "The only one who wasn't paid to forget. Director Voss. He was there. He was just a liaison back then. He actually smiled as he signed the death warrant for my people. He called the deal economically elegant." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were burning with a cold fire. "I want to burn his elegance to ash." The lab barge was a sleek, silver needle hanging in the blackness of the debris field. It looked sterile, silent. Mara brought our ship in close, matching the barge's rotation so we could clamp onto an emergency maintenance hatch. "Radio silence from here on out," Mara's voice crackled over the comms. "I'll run interference on their sensors, but if you trip a hard alarm, they'll vent the entire station's atmosphere before I can even think about getting you out." Vesper and I slipped into the airlock. I had my tool belt. Vesper was now wearing a tight, streamlined gray cloak. I bypassed the outer door in about 10 seconds. Just a standard pressure lock, the kind I could open in my sleep. It was the inner door that had me worried. I popped open the access panel. "Laser grid," I muttered. "Motion sensitive. We break a single beam, the whole place locks down." I peered into the hallway ahead. It was a dense web of invisible death, only visible when I sprayed a puff of mist into the air, revealing countless red lines crisscrossing the corridor. "I can disable the pressure plates on the floor," I said, "but I can't cut power to the beams without triggering the backup generator." "I can get through," Vesper said calmly. "It's too tight," I argued. "Look at those gaps. There may be 6 inches. "Watch," she said. She slipped off the cloak. Underneath, she wore a simple, dark thermal suit. She took one deep breath, and as she exhaled, her whole body seemed to relax, to almost lengthen. Then she stepped into the grid. It was terrifying and beautiful to watch. She didn't just move, she flowed. She arched her back, sliding under a beam at thigh level, while twisting her torso to avoid a vertical one just inches from her shoulder. She moved with a slow, agonizing grace, her muscles trembling from the strain of holding these impossible poses. She was like liquid shadow, pouring herself through the tiny gaps in the light. When she reached the far side, she pressed the manual override panel. The red beams vanished. "Show off," I breathed out, realizing I'd been holding my breath the whole time. We moved deeper into the barge. The air was cold, smelling of antiseptic and ozone. We found the server room, and I jacked right into the terminal, my fingers flying across the holographic keys. "Found the wafer," I said. "It's in the secure vault, Sector 4. We rushed toward Sector 4, but to get there, we had to cut through the biological containment wing. The door slid open, and Vesper froze solid. The entire room was lined with cages, huge reinforced glass cells, and inside them were creatures, exotic animals from a dozen different worlds, like a six-legged jaguar from Proxima and some kind of avian-reptile hybrid. But in the last 3 cells, there were people. They were Solari, Vesper's people. 2 males and a female, curled on the floor, rail-thin and hooked up to tubes that were draining their blood into large collection canisters. Vesper made a sound that wasn't human. It was a low, vibrating snarl that seemed to shake the glass of the cells. Her eyes flared a deep crimson, the rings expanding until almost no black was left. Her fangs descended, snapping into place with an audible, wet click, and her fingernails seemed to lengthen, digging into her own palms. "Monsters!" she hissed. "They're drinking them!" She lunged for the control panel, her hand raised to smash it to pieces. "Vesper!" I yelled, grabbing her wrist. She spun on me, snarling like a cornered animal. For a second, she didn't even recognize me. She was pure rage, a pure predator. She was everything the propaganda had ever claimed she was. "Let me go!" she shrieked. "I will kill them all! I will open their throats!" "No!" I shouted, wrestling her back. "If you open these cells, the alarms will trip, the station will vent, and they will die, Vesper. They will all die." She fought me with a strength that felt completely supernatural. She threw me backward and my head cracked hard against the metal wall. I slid to the floor, my vision swimming. Vesper stood over me, panting, her hand raised like a claw. But then she looked at me. She saw the trickle of blood running down from my hairline. And she froze. The crimson red drained from her eyes, leaving only that star-dark void. Her fangs retracted. She looked down at her own hands, which were shaking violently. I wanted to," she stammered, horrified. I pushed myself up, ignoring the throbbing pain in my head. I didn't raise my hands or reach for my weapon. I just walked toward her. "Look at me," I said softly. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I'm a monster. The hunger, the rage, it's always so close." "You are not a monster," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "You are angry. You have every right to be. But don't let them turn your pain into the weapon they always wanted you to be." I reached out and took her trembling hand. "We will save them," I promised. "Not today, but we will." "We can't win today," he said, his voice tight. "But we can get the proof. We expose Voss, and then we come back with the fleet. With the law." Vesper barely heard him. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the terrified woman in the cage next to hers, pressing her hand against the cold glass. "I will come back for you," she whispered in her native tongue, a promise that felt like a prayer. "Just hold on." With the small blue silicon chip from the vault in hand, they raced back to the ship. The escape felt unnervingly easy. Once they were clear, Mara, their pilot, scanned the chip while Jace plugged it into the ship's main console. His face went white. "This isn't agricultural data," he stammered, his eyes glued to the screen. It's an executable file." "What's that mean in plain English?" Mara snapped. Jace swallowed hard, his voice filled with a dawning horror. "It's a legal virus. It's designed to attack the colonial databases and rewrite the metadata for entire species. It finds the classification for sentient being and flips a switch, changing it to chattel property." Vesper stared at the lines of code, the digital chains meant to enslave millions. "It's for the election," Jace realized, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Voss isn't just planning to win. He's going to run this code the second he takes office. The moment he finishes his victory speech, every refugee on Kepler-9, every salary, every non-citizen in the sector becomes legal property. The police won't help them. They'll be the ones rounding them up." "Thousands," Vesper breathed. "He's going to enslave thousands of us in an instant." The weight of their failure settled heavily as they docked back at the Rust Bucket station to meet their contact. The thrill of the heist was gone, replaced by a raw, gnawing fear. Walking down the cramped corridor toward the airlock, Jace and Vesper were forced so close their shoulders brushed. He stopped, and so did she, standing inches apart in the silence, the air thick with the smell of ozone and terror. Jace could feel the heat rolling off her skin, his eyes drawn to her mouth as her lips parted slightly. He remembered the sharp, addictive calm when she'd bit his wrist earlier, a strange mix of danger and peace. Vesper looked up, her gaze searching his. She was trembling, but it wasn't from the cold. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "Of what?" Jace asked, his voice low. "Of what I want," she confessed. "My body, it has instincts. It wants to take, to feed, to own." "That's just biology," Jace said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "Is it?" She stepped even closer. "Or is it just me? Because when I look at you, I don't just smell blood. I feel gravity. I just want to be near you. Is that the monster inside me, or is it the woman?" Jace lifted his hand, his fingers hovering inches from her cheek. He wanted to kiss her more than he wanted his next breath, to lose himself in her dangerous, beautiful darkness. But he couldn't. He let his hand fall. "If I kiss you now," he said, his voice cracking, "it's because I'm looking for comfort and you're vulnerable. And that's not too far from ownership." Vesper closed her eyes, leaning into the empty space where his touch should have been. "No one owns anyone," she whispered, their shared promise. "No one owns anyone," Jace echoed, taking a step back. The tension between them stretched thin, then snapped, leaving them as two fugitives in a hallway once more. "Let's go see the broker," Jace said finally. Their contact, Kale, was waiting with a greedy smile. "Beautiful," he crooned, plugging the chip into his console. "You deliver, I deliver." He tapped a key, and the shipping records from Vesper's own transport crate flashed onto the screen. Jace read the details aloud. "Origin Twilight Sector 4. Authorization, diplomatic pouch. Signatory, High Counselor Valoran." Vesper gasped, stumbling back. "Valoran? He was my father's most trusted advisor. He was the one who arranged my escape." Her voice broke. He sold me." "It wasn't a capture," Kale mused with a smirk. "It was a liquidation. They sold the only witness to the highest bidder." Before anyone could react, the massive blast door to the shop exploded inward, sending a wave of concussive force through the room. Kale was thrown against a server rack as smoke and shrapnel filled the air. Jace grabbed Vesper, pulling her behind a stack of cargo crates. 4 figures in pristine white heliogene tactical armor stepped through the smoke, followed by their leader. He wore no armor, just a tailored suit that cost more than everything Jace had ever owned. He was handsome, with a cruel smile that never reached his cold eyes. He held a silk handkerchief to his nose, looking at the grimy shop with absolute disgust. "Unit 734, the man called out, his voice smooth as velvet. "Come on out, pet. You've been off your leash long enough." Vesper went rigid beside Jace, her nails digging into his arm hard enough to break the skin. "Silas," she whispered, her voice choked with pure terror. "The recovery specialist." Jace risked a peek. The soldiers were sweeping the room with their rifles raised. "We know you're here," Silas said, tapping a device on his wrist. "The beacon may be gone, but the conditioning is forever. Shall we test it?" He cleared his throat and spoke a single, sharp phrase in High Solari. The sound was like shattering glass. Vesper immediately convulsed, gagging and clawing at her own throat as her eyes rolled back in her head. "Stop it!" Jace yelled, leaping to his feet and aiming his pistol. Silas just smiled at him. "Ah, the little thief! Kill him!" As the soldiers raised their weapons, Vesper screamed, "Wait!" She stumbled out from behind the crates, her hands in the air. "Don't shoot! I submit!" "Vesper, no!" Jace cried out, but she didn't even look at him. She walked slowly toward Silas, her head bowed in defeat, and fell to her knees at his feet. "I submit," she repeated, her voice a dead monotone. Owner acknowledged. Silas let out a soft chuckle, reaching down to stroke her hair as if she were a disobedient puppy. "Good girl. See? It's all so much easier when you accept your true nature. You aren't a person, Vesper. You're a biological asset." He looked over his shoulder at his men. "Secure her. Burn the shop and leave the human for the flames." Silas pulled a heavy shock collar from his pocket and leaned down to fasten it around her neck. "Look at me, pet," he commanded softly. Vesper lifted her head. Her eyes weren't dull and empty anymore. They were on fire. She spoke 3 quiet words in Solari. Silas froze instantly, his pupils dilating as the collar slipped from his numb fingers. Jace could only watch in stunned silence as Vesper rose slowly to her feet and leaned in close to Silas's ear. "You forgot something," she whispered in the common trade language. "I listened to you for months. I learned your cadence. I know all your little control codes." She placed her palm flat on his chest and spoke a sharp, guttural command. Silas gasped, then spun around to face his own soldiers, his eyes wide with panic. "Defend the asset!" he screamed, drawing his own pistol. "Hostiles are in the room!" He began firing wildly at his own men. In the ensuing chaos, Vesper grabbed Jace's hand. "Run!" They bolted through a back exit as the shop erupted in a firefight between the Heliogene soldiers and their brainwashed commander, sprinting through the station's twisting corridors. Mara's voice screamed in their comms. "I'm at the dock with the engines hot! You have 60 seconds before this whole sector goes into lockdown!" They burst onto the docking platform just as the bay doors began to close. Jace practically threw Vesper through the ship's airlock and dove in right behind her. "Go, go, go!" he yelled. The ship ripped away from its moorings. Behind them, the station lit up with secondary explosions as the Heliogene squad, realizing they'd been tricked, decided to erase all the evidence. In the safety of hyperspace, the silence on the bridge was deafening. "They torched the whole outpost!" Mara fumed. "Do you have any idea how many contacts I just lost? We're burning bridges faster than we can build them." Jace sank to the floor, his head in his hands. He felt sick from the violence, the close call, and the gut-wrenching image of Vesper on her knees. Vesper stood by the main viewport, watching the stars streak by, her expression numb. "You used his own voice against him," Jace said, finally breaking the silence. "I learned the system in order to survive it," she replied quietly. "But seeing him again, seeing how easily I could have fallen back into that cage," she shuddered. "Everywhere I go, Jace, people get hurt. Fire just seems to follow me." Jace pushed himself up and walked to the console where the stolen chip was still plugged in. "We have the code," he said, his voice hardening with resolve. "We can still stop this." He pulled up the file's execution timestamp, and his blood ran cold. "What is it?" Mara asked, seeing the look on his face. "The election," Jace said. "It's not next week. Voss moved it up." He pointed a trembling finger at the date on the screen. "The victory speech is tonight, in 4 hours. Vesper spun around, her eyes wide. "The override code activates in 4 hours, Jace said grimly. "If we don't stop that broadcast, it's over. Everyone becomes property." Mara was already at her navigation computer. "We're 3 sectors away from the Meridian Assembly," she announced. "If I redline the engines and pray they don't explode, we might just make it. But we'll be flying in hot, with half the authorities in the galaxy on our tail." Jace turned to Vesper. "Are you ready to finally stop running?" he asked gently. Vesper's eyes flashed a dangerous, beautiful crimson. "I'm done running," she said, her voice like steel. "Let's go drop the beat." Mara sighed. "I think she means beat them down. But honestly, I'm too tired to argue. Strap in," she ordered, slamming the throttle forward. "We're going to go crash a party." The little ship groaned as it dove through the fiery corona of a red giant star, a desperate shortcut known as the Cinder Path. Inside, the temperature soared, turning the air into a suffocating dry heat. For Jace and Mara, it was miserable. For Vesper, it was agony. She lay on a bunk in the crew quarters, her body rigid with a fever that seemed to make the air around her shimmer. The proximity to the star, even with the ship's shielding, was attacking her on a cellular level. But as she fought the sunsickness, a new kind of fire burned in her eyes. It was no longer the fire of a cornered animal, but the focused, burning flame of a warrior about to go to war. She was made for a world of endless twilight, a planet wandering lost between stars. Here, under the glare of a system sun, she was like a creature from the deepest ocean trench thrown onto a scorching desert dune. Jace sat hunched on the floor, his back pressed against the humming bulkhead of the ship. He'd shed his jumpsuit and was down to a sweat-soaked undershirt. In his lap sat a scavenged bowl of ice chips from the galley, next to a stack of cold gel packs. He dipped a rag into the icy water and gently pressed it to Vesper's forehead. She hissed, a sound from deep in her chest as her fangs dropped on pure instinct. Then, she recognized him. "Hey, it's just me," Jace said, his voice a low rumble. "It's only water." Vesper's body went lax and her eyelids fluttered. The deep space black of her eyes was fogged over with a sickly gray film. "I can hear it," she breathed. "The sun. It's screaming." Jace wrung out the cloth and moved it to the back of her neck, careful to avoid the raw, bruised skin where the collar used to be. "Just listen to my voice," Jace urged. "Block it out. Listen to me." He swapped a warm gel pack on her arm for a fresh, cold one. "Tell me a story," Vesper whispered, her hand reaching for his, lost and blind. "A story without any fire." Jace paused, then took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Okay," he started. "When I was a little boy, I lived in a habitat called Pacifica. It was built to feel like an old-world ocean coast. Every morning at 6 o'clock, it would rain. And not that recycled acid stuff. This was real rain, cold and clean." Vesper's eyes slid shut, her breathing shaky. "Rain," she echoed. "We'd run out and play in it," Jace went on. "The whole ground was covered in this stuff called grass. It was soft and green, like a carpet made of millions of tiny living ribbons. When you laid down on it, it smelled alive. Everything was cool and damp, and the sky was the color of slate." "Slate," Vesper repeated the word like a prayer. "Cool. Damp." Jace kept his voice a steady, calm river, telling her about the crash of waves against a seawall, the sharp taste of salt on the wind, and the feeling of a thick fog rolling in to wrap the world in a quiet gray hug. He was building her a shelter made of words, a cool, dark refuge from the screaming star just outside the hull. For 4 hours he sat there. 4 hours of changing packs, dabbing her feverish skin, and holding her tethered to this ship, to sanity, with nothing but the sound of his voice and the touch of his hands. Finally, the ship broke free of the planet's gravity and leaped into the cold, silent dark of deep space. Vesper's fever broke with it. The gray film receded from her eyes, leaving them as clear and endless as the void outside. She just watched him for a long moment. Jace was slumped over, his head resting against the mattress, completely drained. "You stayed," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jace looked up, blinking away the exhaustion. "Of course I stayed." Vesper glanced at her arm where the last cooling pack had been. "In the court," she said, her tone utterly flat. "If I got sick, the handlers drugged me. If I was hurt, they patched me up. But they never, ever touched me unless there was a purpose. And that purpose was always about money. They fixed me so I could fight. They fed me so I could bleed." She turned her head, locking her gaze on his. "You touched me for 4 hours," she said. "You cooled my skin. You held my hand. And you didn't ask for a single thing." A knot formed in Jace's throat. The real tragedy of her life wasn't just the cages. It was that she'd never known a moment of kindness that wasn't just another transaction. He sat up a little straighter. "Vesper," he said, and reached out, stopping his hand 3 inches from her face. He just held it there, waiting. "May I touch your forehead?" he asked. "Just to check your temperature." Vesper's eyes flicked from his hand to his face. She saw the question there, his absolute refusal to close that tiny gap without her permission. "Yes," she breathed. Jace gently laid the back of his hand on her skin. It was cool. He drew back. "May I hold your hand?" he asked. Vesper's breath hitched. "Yes." He took her hand, weaving his fingers through hers. "Consent isn't a deal we make," Jace said, his voice firm but gentle. "It's a promise. It means your choice matters more to me than my own wants." Vesper stared at their joined hands. A single tear broke free and traced a silent path into her hair. She didn't bother to wipe it away. She just squeezed his hand, holding on like he was the only solid ground in a crumbling universe. The spell was shattered by Mara's voice crackling over the comms. "Meridian assembly in 15 minutes. All right, lovebirds, get your game faces on. And Vesper, try to look a little less intergalactic assassin and a bit more happy tourist." Jace pushed himself to his feet, his knees popping. He gave Vesper's hand one last squeeze before letting go. "Ready to pretend we're normal?" he asked. Vesper sat up, effortlessly graceful as she smoothed her hair. She looked regal, terrifying, and breathtaking all at once. "I am, as they say, down to clown," she said, with absolutely zero irony. Jace let out a real surprised laugh that startled them both. "We have got to stop letting Mara teach you slang," he chuckled. The Meridian Assembly was a gigantic rotating space station, a neutral zone where delegates from 200 systems could argue about tariffs and pretend humanitarian crises didn't exist. It was sterile, bright, and choked with red tape. They docked in a commercial bay. Mara stayed behind to keep the engines hot while Jace and Vesper stepped out. They were dressed in boring traveler's clothes, simple tunics and pants in dull, earthy colors. Vesper also wore a pair of oversized sunglasses to hide her unique eyes. Customs was a predictable headache of long lines and bored officials. "Remember," Mara's voice whispered in their earpieces, "you're a couple. A totally uninteresting domestic couple. Hold hands. Look mushy. If she looks like she's about to bolt, Jace, give her a peck on the cheek or something." They finally made it to the front. The customs officer was a scaly, reptilian creature who looked like he deeply regretted every life choice that led him to this desk, and especially disliked carbon-based life forms. "Papers," he grunted, not even bothering to look up. Jace passed over the 2 fake IDs their contact had provided. "Purpose of your visit?" the officer droned, scanning the cards. "Tourism," Jace said, forcing a slightly shaky smile. "You know, here to see the sights. The Great Hall, the floating gardens." The officer finally looked up, his gaze landing on Vesper. He peered at her over his glasses. "Ma'am, please remove the sunglasses." Vesper went rigid. Jace felt her hand tighten in his. "She has a sensitivity to the light," Jace said, a little too quickly. "An ocular condition." "Remove the glasses," the officer repeated, his hand inching toward an alarm panel beneath the counter. Vesper slowly reached up and took them off. She kept her eyes squinted, trying to conceal the crimson rings around her irises. The officer just stared and stared. He frowned. "Is something wrong?" Vesper asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You're staring." "Look affectionate," Mara buzzed in Vesper's ear. "Like you're madly in love with him." Vesper turned her head and fixed her gaze on Jace. She tried to copy the looks she'd seen on cheesy romance advertisements, intense, focused, unwavering. Then she turned that same look on the officer, trying to project pure adoration. Instead, Because she was a predator who communicated mainly through intense, silent focus, she gave him a dead-eyed, unblinking glare that screamed, "I'm currently deciding which of your major arteries to rip out with my teeth." Then she smiled. It was wide, sharp, and showed far too many teeth. "We are in love," Vesper stated flatly. "We enjoy being in close proximity to one another." The officer's scaly skin went pale. He physically recoiled in his chair, every reptilian instinct in his brain shrieking that he was inches away from an apex hunter. "Oh, okay," he stammered, frantically stamping their data slates. "Approved. Just move along. Go enjoy your proximity. Somewhere else." They hurried through the gate. Jace let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Vesper," he whispered. "That was horrifying. You looked like you were about to eat his face." "I was being affectionate," Vesper replied, genuinely confused. "I made direct eye contact and displayed my teeth as a sign of happiness." "Okay, new rule. I'm giving you lessons on human smiling," Jace said. "Think less teeth, more crinkly eyes." They located Counselor Sato Ren in a quiet garden sector, sitting on a bench under a shimmering, holographic cherry tree. He was an older human man with a face etched with worry lines and gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. He was tossing digital breadcrumbs to digital koi fish in a pond and didn't look up as they approached. "I already told your messenger," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "I cannot approve the zoning permit for that new casino." "We're not here about a casino, Counselor," Jace said. Sato turned. His eyes met Jace's, then slid over to Vesper. The bag of digital crumbs slipped from his fingers, vanishing into pixels before it could even hit the ground. Sato scrambled to his feet, his mouth working but no words coming out. "The witness," he finally whispered. Vesper stepped forward and slipped off her sunglasses. "Counselor Ren," she said, "I was told you were a man of integrity. I've come to see if that's true." Sato glanced around wildly, his composure gone. "Are you out of your mind bringing her here?" "She's on record as terminated. The official report claimed her transport had a catastrophic hull breach." "The report was a lie," Jace stated simply, "just like the treaty." Sato collapsed back onto the bench, pressing his fingers to his temples. "I knew it. I knew Voss was a snake, but I never imagined." He looked up at Vesper, his eyes wide with dawning horror. "Do you have any idea what they're planning?" "We know about the override codes," Jace said. "We know Voss plans to use them to enslave every refugee in this sector. Tonight." Sato shook his head grimly. "It's even worse than you think. The entire assembly is compromised. Heliogene has bought and paid for nearly half the security detail. They've rebranded them as the Anti-Predator Division, but it's nothing more than a death squad. They're already sweeping the station, rounding up anyone without official citizenship papers. If they find you, they won't arrest you. They'll simply erase you." "I have to testify," Vesper insisted, her voice ringing with conviction. "I need to stand before that assembly and tell them exactly what I saw in the Twilight Court." "You can't," Sato said, his face a mask of defeat. "Voss controls the chamber. He controls the mics, the feeds, the moderators. The second you step onto that floor, he'll cut your audio, brand you a terrorist, and have you shot before you can say a single word." "Unless what?" Jace pressed. "What's the catch?" Sato's voice was grim. "Unless the proof is so absolute, so undeniable, that it creates a truth cascade." Vesper's eyes widened in sudden understanding. "The relic," she breathed. "It's here, in the Museum of Xenohistory." Sato nodded. "They recovered it from a dead world 3 months ago. It's locked away in the high vault." He explained what it was. A psychometric projector that records memories and plays them back as holograms, filtering out every single lie. It literally verifies truth at a molecular level. "If I touch it," Vesper whispered, hope creeping into her voice, "I can project the memory of them signing the treaty." of the bribe. They can't just shut off a hologram that's filling the entire assembly chamber. Sato looked at them, his expression bleak. The museum is a fortress. It has gravity traps, logic locks, and it's guarded by the most advanced automated systems money can buy. We broke into a heliogene black site, Jace shot back. I think we can handle a museum. Reaching into his robe, Sato pulled out a sleek keycard. This will get you through the service entrance, but once you're inside, you're completely on your own. Get that relic and bring it to the broadcast tower. I'll do what I can to delay Voss's speech. He turned to Vesper, his eyes filled with a deep, ancient sadness. I'm so sorry, he said, for what my people have done to yours. Vesper simply bowed her head. Apology accepted, Counselor. Now help us save them. The Museum of Xeno History was a breathtaking tower of dark stone and glass, hanging suspended in the very center of the station's gravity well. A moment later, Jace and Vesper slipped inside through the service hatch. The inside was pitch black, except for the faint blue glow of stasis fields preserving artifacts from 1,000 different worlds. The silence was so thick you could feel it. They crept through the hall of lost civilizations, where statues of forgotten gods seemed to watch them from the shadows. Map says the high vault is in the gravity well chamber, Jace whispered, glancing at his datapad. They finally reached it, a massive spherical room, but there was no floor. Instead, a series of floating platforms drifted aimlessly in a zero-gravity field, and right in the middle, held in a beam of pure white light, was the relic. It looked like a sharp, jagged piece of obsidian pulsing with a soft, violet rhythm. So how do we get over there? Vesper asked. Jace pointed at the floating platforms. We jump. But watch your step. The gravity here is unstable. 1 second down is that way, he pointed. The next, it's sideways. They took a leap of faith. It was like a chaotic ballet, jumping from one platform to the next. Twice, the gravity field completely flipped. Jace suddenly found himself falling toward the ceiling, only to have Vesper grab his belt at the last second and yank him onto a drifting slab of rock. They finally made it to the center. The relic's humming grew louder as Vesper got closer, almost like it was singing to her. It knows me, Vesper whispered in awe. It recognizes the blood of the witnesses. She reached out a trembling hand. Do it, Jace said softly. She touched the stone. The effect was immediate. The room erupted in light. A shockwave of pure psychic energy threw Jace backward, but he never hit the wall. He was just hanging there, suspended in midair. He wasn't in the museum anymore. He was inside Vesper's mind. The air was thick with smoke, holographic smoke that swirled into solid, three-dimensional shapes. Jace saw a grand room with high stone walls and silk banners. He saw Vesper, younger, wearing ceremonial robes and hiding in the shadows, her eyes wide with terror. He saw men around a table. One was in a heliogene suit, a younger, smiling Voss. Another was a tall, terrifying alien lord. He saw crates overflowing with money. He saw the document, and he heard the words, ringing in his own skull as if they were spoken right next to him. 1 million credits per unit, Voss said. A fair price for livestock. The alien lord replied, Agreed. Take them. They are yours. The scene instantly changed. Chains. Jace saw Vesper being dragged down a long corridor. He felt her terror and confusion. He felt the cold, hard metal of the collar snapping around her neck. He felt the sting of the needle in her arm. He felt the soul-crushing betrayal of being sold by the very people she had sworn to serve. He felt her hunger. He felt the darkness of the box they put her in. He felt a loneliness that was colder and emptier than deep space. Then the connection snapped. The light was gone. Jace slammed hard onto the platform, gasping for air, his lungs on fire. Vesper was on her knees in front of the relic, clutching it to her chest. She was crying, but making no sound, just deep heaving sobs that shook her entire body. Jace scrambled over and wrapped his arms around her. I saw it, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I saw everything. Vesper buried her face into his shoulder. Now you know, she sobbed. You know the shame. I let them take me. I didn't even fight. You were a child, Jace said fiercely, holding her tighter. You were betrayed. That's not shame, Vesper. That's survival. Suddenly, Mara's panicked voice crackled in their ears. Guys, you tripped a silent alarm. Security is swarming the building. The doors to the chamber hissed open, and blinding floodlights hit them. Freeze! A voice boomed. Meridian security, put the weapon down! Jace shielded Vesper with his body. We're unarmed. This is all a misunderstanding. A laser blast shot out, scorching the platform just inches from Jace's foot. The next one goes in your chest, the guard yelled. Surrender the asset! Vesper looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot, not from crying anymore, but from a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. She saw their uniforms and realized they weren't standard security. They were wearing the black armbands of the Anti-Predator Division. They're not here to arrest us, she hissed. She stood up. Vesper, no, Jace pleaded. She handed him the relic. Keep it safe. Then she moved. She leaped from the platform, diving through the open air toward the ring of guards on the catwalks above. It was all a blur. Vesper landed right in the center of the squad. She didn't have a weapon. She was the weapon. She ducked under a stun baton, grabbed the guard by his armor, and threw him over the railing into the anti-gravity field, where he floated away, flailing. She spun around, dodging plasma bolts that burned the air where she had been just a microsecond before. She kicked a rifle out of a second guard's hands and swept his legs out from under him. She was terrifying, a whirlwind of pale skin and darkness. She hissed, her fangs bared, a creature from a nightmare. One guard pulled a knife and lunged. Vesper caught his wrist. She could have snapped it. She could have ripped his throat out. Jace saw the hesitation, that split second where the predator in her wanted to kill. But she didn't. She twisted the knife from his hand and slammed the handle into his helmet, knocking him out cold. She moved through the squad like water, disarming and disabling them, one by one. But she didn't kill a single one. She cleared the entire catwalk in 20 seconds. She stood there, breathing hard, surrounded by groaning men. She looked up at Jace on the floating platform and held out a hand. Come on, she said. Jace jumped, landing beside her. They ran. They burst out of the museum and into the waiting cargo skiff that Mara had ready at the service entrance. Go, Jace yelled, tossing the relic into the back. Mara slammed the thrusters, and they rocketed away into the neon canyons of Meridian. They ditched the skiff in the lower levels and hid out in a safe house Sato had set up for them, a tiny, windowless room in the maintenance district. Jace locked the door and slumped against it, exhausted. Vesper stood in the middle of the room, shaking as the adrenaline crash hit her hard. She looked down at her hands. I didn't kill them, she whispered. I wanted to. The blood, it was singing to me. But I didn't. Jace pushed himself off the door and walked over to her. I know, he said softly. I was watching. You held back. Vesper looked up at him, her eyes wide and frantic. Am I a monster, Jace? Tell me the truth. When you saw my memories, when you saw me fight, did you see a person? Or did you see a weapon? He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. I saw a queen, Jace said. I saw a woman who went through hell and came out the other side refusing to burn. He looked down at her lips. He felt that pull, that gravity she was always talking about. Vesper made a tiny, broken sound, and then Jace kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate and raw, a collision of fear and relief. Vesper grabbed the front of his tunic, pulling him closer, her body pressing hard against his. Jace's hands got tangled in her hair. There was no hunger in it, not for blood. This was a different kind of starvation. It was the need to be seen, to be known, to be accepted for everything she was. Vesper's mouth opened, and Jace felt the sharp, light graze of her fangs against his lip. He didn't pull away. He kissed her deeper, tasting the faint copper of his own blood mixed with the cool, electric taste of her. They finally broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads resting against each other. "I choose you," Vesper whispered, her voice fierce. "Not because you saved me, but because you see me." "I choose you," Jace said back. "Always." The moment hung between them, perfect and fragile. And then Jace's comlink chimed. A priority message. Jace pulled back, still breathless, and checked the screen. It was a news alert. Breaking news, Councillor Sato Ren arrested for treason. Anti-Predator Division secures Meridian Assembly. Jace's blood ran cold. "Sato." "They got him." Then a second message blinked to life. A private text from an unknown sender. Jace opened it. It was a video file. It showed a small house in a suburban dome. It was a house Jace recognized instantly. It was his parents' home on Kepler 9. The camera zoomed in. Through the window, he could see his mother and father sitting at their dinner table. Then a small laser dot appeared on his father's chest. A voice came over the video, smooth and cultured. It was Silas. "Mr. Wren, we have secured the secondary assets. If you do not surrender the unit and the stolen data within 1 hour, we will initiate remote termination. Don't be a hero. Be a beautiful son." The screen went black. Jace stared at the device. The phone slipped from his numb fingers and hit the floor with a crack. "Jace?" Vesper asked, stepping closer. "What is it?" Jace looked up, his face a mask of horror. His face was a shattered mess of horror. "They have my family," he choked out, the words barely a whisper. Vesper froze. "We have the truth," Jace insisted, his gaze flicking to the humming relic in the corner. "But if we use it, they'll kill my parents." The air in the safe house grew thick and heavy. The thrill of their victory at the museum, the warmth of their shared kiss. It all dissolved into the ice-cold reality of an impossible choice. "We have 1 hour," Jace said, his voice grim. Vesper looked from the glowing relic back to Jace, her expression hardening into pure determination. "Then we'll have to be very, very fast," she said. The room smelled of ozone and fear, and Jace Wren dropped his head into his hands, staring at the dead screen of his communicator. The video of his parents kept playing on a loop inside his head, the tiny red laser dot dancing over his father's heart. He saw it every single time he blinked. "They're going to kill them," Jace said, his voice scraping the silence raw. "If I don't turn you over, they're just going to murder my parents right there in their own kitchen." He shot to his feet and started pacing the cramped room like a caged animal. "We have to stop. We have to call Silas. Maybe I can trade myself. Offer him the data if he lets them go." A cold panic was rising in his chest, short-circuiting his brain. He was an engineer. He was supposed to fix things. But you can't fix a sniper's rifle aimed at your family from 3 sectors away. Vesper just watched him from the corner. She stood absolutely motionless, her hands tucked away in the sleeves of her gray cloak. She looked like a statue carved from ice, completely untouched by the inferno of his terror. "Jace," she said, her voice soft. "Don't," he snapped, whirling on her. "Don't you dare tell me it's going to be okay. You don't know that. These people are monsters." "I know," Vesper replied, stepping toward him with a fluid, silent grace. "I know exactly what they are. And that's how I know they're lying." Jace stopped his frantic pacing. "What?" "They deal in fear," Vesper said, her tone a steady anchor in the swirling chaos of the room. "It's what they spend. Fear makes you irrational. It shrinks your world. It makes you think that if you just do what they say, the hurting will stop." She reached out, taking his hand in hers. Her skin was cool, her grip surprisingly strong. But the pain never stops when you obey them, Jace. It just gets more organized. If you give me up, they will still kill your parents. They can't afford to leave any witnesses, you know that. Jace stared into her dark eyes and saw a truth as hard and sharp as a diamond, a truth she had learned the hard way, in a cage. He let out a breath that was half a sob and half a curse. "You're right," he whispered. "God, I know you're right. But Vesper, I'm so scared." "Good," Vesper said. "Be scared, but use it. Don't let the fear drive the car. You drive. The fear is just the gas." She gave his hand a final squeeze. "We go to the tower," she declared. "We set their lies on fire. It's the only way to save anybody." Jace gave a slow, deliberate nod. The panic was finally fading, replaced by a cold, grim purpose. "Okay," he said. "Let's go start a riot." The Meridian Broadcast Tower was a massive needle of glass and steel that stabbed the city's smog-filled night sky. Down below, the streets were a churning ocean of people. It was election night. The polls had closed an hour ago, and the projections were already calling a landslide victory for Director Halden Voss. The crowd was a single, terrifying creature, lit by the red and gold holographic banners of the Voss campaign, all chanting the same thing: "Pure worlds, pure blood, safety first." Jace and Vesper slipped through the shadowy service alleys that snaked around the tower's base. Mara's voice crackled over their encrypted channel. "I'm in position at the relay junction," she whispered. "Signal boosters are planted, but security's thick down here. They've got those new perimeter drones, the really mean ones." "We're heading for the south maintenance entrance now," Jace answered, adjusting the backpack carrying the relic. It felt heavy, a low hum vibrating against his spine. Vesper moved beside him. She'd shed the gray cloak, revealing a dark, tactical jumpsuit they'd found at the safe house. She looked lethal. As they got closer to the biometric scanner on the door, Vesper suddenly froze, her breath catching in her throat. Jace glanced at her. At that same moment, the lights over the door began to flicker, and a nearby vending machine let out a shower of sparks before going dark. "What's going on?" Jace whispered. "It's the relic," Vesper said, her hand pressed against her chest. "It's awake. It's amplifying my biofield. When my heart rate jumps, electronics start to freak out." Jace stared at the door panel. The keypad was glitching, numbers scrolling by in a chaotic blur. "A ghost in the machine," Jace muttered. "Okay, use it." "What?" "Put your hand on the panel," Jace urged. "Don't try to hack it. Just feel it. Be anxious. Be angry." Vesper frowned, but she pressed her pale hand flat against the lock. She shut her eyes tight. She thought of the cages. She thought of the little red laser dot on Jace's father's chest. The lock sparked violently. Its indicator light turned a sick shade of purple before shorting out with a pop. The heavy door hissed open. "Nice," Jace breathed, and they ducked inside. The tower's interior was cool and silent, a jarring change from the roaring mob outside. They took the emergency stairs, climbing 40 flights to stay clear of the elevator sensors. By the time they reached the broadcast deck, Jace's legs felt like they were on fire. Vesper hardly seemed out of breath. The door to the main control room was standing wide open, unguarded. That was very, very wrong. "It's a trap," Jace whispered, knowing it in his gut. Vesper nodded grimly. "I know, but the uplink is in there. We have to spring it." Jace pulled his pistol. Vesper flexed her hands, and claws slid from her fingertips. Jace kicked the door the rest of the way open. The control room was a massive, cavernous space, filled with walls of monitors and dozens of technicians. One entire wall was a giant window looking down on the city and the celebrating crowds, and standing right in the middle of the room, waiting for them, was Silas. The Helio-Gene handler was dressed in a perfect suit, holding a glass of champagne. He didn't look armed. He just looked bored. "Right on time," Silas said with a sip. "I told the director you'd take the stairs. It's such a human weakness, thinking that hard work equals being sneaky." Jace leveled his gun at Silas's chest. "Get away from the console." Silas let out a soft laugh. "Or what? You'll shoot me, and the sniper over in Sector 3 will pull the trigger on your mother? Is that really the deal you want to make, Mr. Wren?" Jace froze, his aim faltering. Silas took a casual step forward. "Let's be adults about this," he said. "The election's over. Voss won. The new legislation is all queued up for the midnight broadcast. You've lost. But you can still save your family. Give me the relic in your bag," he purred, "and you can walk away. I'll even wipe your criminal record clean." Vesper stepped out from behind Jace. "Show me the contract," she said. Silas blinked, the first crack in his polished armor. "Excuse me?" "You're offering a deal," Vesper stated, her voice sharp and clear. "A trade. An asset for 2 lives. I know your type, Silas. You love paperwork. You love making evil look like boring old bureaucracy. So show me the terms. In writing. Legally binding." Silas just stared at her for a long moment. Then a slow, amused smile spread across his face. "You really have been paying attention, haven't you, pet?" He tapped a command into the console, and a holographic document materialized in the air between them. "Standard non-disclosure agreement," Silas explained, "with a plea deal attached for Citizen Wren. It's all there." Vesper walked toward the hologram. She began to scan the glowing text. Jace watched her, realizing what she was doing. She was buying time. She was pulling him in. "While you're reading," Silas said, nodding toward the window, "you might want to take a look at your new leader." He pointed at the massive screens on the wall. They showed Director Voss on a balcony, waving to the screaming crowds. But something was wrong. Voss's movements were jerky. His smile was stretched way too wide, a frozen mask of joy that didn't even touch his eyes. "He looks like a puppet," Jace muttered. Silas chuckled. "Poor choice of words, but not inaccurate." He tapped another key. The image on the screen switched to a schematic of Voss's brain. A complicated web of glowing blue neural lace was threaded all through his frontal cortex. "Voss isn't just funded by Helio-Gene," Silas said, his voice dripping with smug pride. "He is Helio-Gene. We developed this interface 5 years ago. Direct neural stimulation, impulse guidance. We don't just suggest policy to him, Jace. We drive him." Jace stared at the screen, horrified. You lobotomized a politician and turned him into a drone." "We optimized him," Silas corrected smoothly. "Democracy is inefficient. People make the wrong choices. We simply ensure the correct choices get made. Voss is the perfect candidate because he has no will of his own. He's just a meat suit for our board of directors." Vesper turned away from the hologram. "And the refugee reclassification?" she asked. "That's the first order of business. Efficiency," Silas said with a shrug. "We need labor for the mines on the Outer Rim. We need test subjects for the next version of the interface. Why waste money importing workers when we can just harvest the ones already here?" He looked directly at Jace. "Last chance, Wren. The broadcast goes live in 5 minutes. Give me the asset." Jace's grip on his gun tightened. "No," Silas sighed dramatically. "I was afraid you'd say that." He snapped his fingers. 2 armored guards materialized from the shadows of the server banks. They weren't carrying stun batons. They were holding high-velocity flesh rifles. "Kill the man," Silas ordered. "Secure the asset." The guards raised their weapons. Jace threw himself behind a console just as the air erupted with the hornet's buzz of razor-sharp projectiles. A shower of sparks rained down on him. Vesper was already moving. She launched herself at the closer guard, a total blur of speed and fury. But these guards were prepared. The one she attacked didn't even flinch. He just activated a shock field built into his armor. Arcs of blue lightning slammed into Vesper's body. She screamed, a raw, ragged sound, and was thrown backward, skidding across the polished floor like a stone. "Vesper!" Jace yelled. He popped up from cover and fired wildly. One of his shots hit the guard in the shoulder, finding a weak spot between the armor plates. The guard grunted and stumbled back a step. Blood sprayed across the floor, a shocking splash of bright red. The metallic tang of it, copper and iron and salt, filled the room in an instant. Vesper, who had been trying to get up, froze solid. Her nostrils flared. In the cramped space, the scent of fresh blood was like a physical blow, overwhelming her already stressed-out system. With her adrenaline pumping and the lingering hunger from her sunsickness, she stared at the puddle on the floor. Her eyes shifted, turning completely black as the crimson rings around her irises bled outward, swallowing the whites entirely. The sound that ripped from her throat wasn't a scream. It was a low, vibrating growl, a primal noise from the very bottom of the food chain. And across the room, Silas just smiled. "Ah," he said, "there's the predator I was looking for." Vesper's back arched, and her fangs dropped, extending to their full, terrifying length. But she wasn't looking at Silas, and she wasn't looking at Jace. Her gaze was locked on the wounded guard. She looked like a starving wolf staring at its last meal. She was losing the battle inside her head. All the conditioning, the gnawing hunger, the raw instinct, it was all taking over. "Vesper!" Jace yelled, scrambling to get to her. Her head snapped toward him, but there was no recognition in her eyes. She let out a vicious hiss, crouching low like she was about to pounce. Jace immediately tossed his gun away, and it clattered noisily against the concrete. Silas watched it all, raising a single eyebrow. "Giving up so soon?" "No," Jace said, and started walking toward Vesper. He didn't run. He didn't creep. He just walked straight toward the monster in the middle of the room. Vesper snarled, her muscles bunching up like coiled springs. She was going to kill him. He could see it plain as day in her eyes. The hunger was a black hole devouring everything else. Jace stopped just 2 feet away from her and lowered himself to his knees. He grabbed the sleeve of his jumpsuit and ripped it clean off, all the way to his elbow. "Vesper," he said. His voice wasn't a command. It was an invitation. He held out his arm, his wrist exposed. The scent of his own blood, a smell that was familiar and safe to her, cut through the air. Vesper flinched, her eyes darting from his wrist to his face. She was practically vibrating, fighting a war inside her own mind. "Don't become what they say you are," Jace whispered. "Don't take blood that was spilled in violence. Take it from a place of love," he urged. Vesper let out a whimper, a mix of hunger and pain. "I'm right here," Jace said. "I'm choosing this, Vesper. Come back to me." He waited, perfectly still. He didn't even flinch when she finally lunged. She slammed into him with the force of a freight train, knocking him flat on his back. Her hands pinned his shoulders to the floor as her mouth hovered just inches from his neck. Silas let out a short, ugly laugh. "See? Nature always wins." But Vesper froze. She heard Silas's voice. She heard the frantic drumming of Jace's heart, terrifyingly fast, but steady. She looked down at Jace. He wasn't fighting her. He was just looking up at her with complete and total trust. He tapped his wrist twice. "Their signal. I'm here. You're safe." Vesper didn't rip out his throat. Instead, she buried her face in the crook of his neck. She wasn't trying to bite him. She was trying to hide. She breathed in his scent, and a long, shuddering tremor ran through her as the human part of her mind clawed its way back from the brink. Then, with infinite care, she moved to his outstretched wrist. She looked into his eyes, waiting for permission, gave a slight nod. "Yes." Her bite was quick, a controlled sip, just enough to rebalance her mind and quiet the screaming static in her brain. Jace gasped, his head thumping back against the floor tiles. The empathetic link between them flared to life. He felt her terror. He felt the cold, jagged shame she had for needing this. And he felt her love for him, a feeling that scared her even more than the hunger. And in turn, she felt him. She felt his stubborn, reckless decency. She felt his absolute refusal to ever see her as a monster. She felt the deep ache of a man who had never thought he deserved to be part of anything important, suddenly realizing he was holding the most important thing in the entire universe. She pulled back and licked the small wound once, the enzymes in her saliva sealing it instantly. Then she stood up. The blackness receded from her eyes, leaving the crimson rings sharp and perfectly controlled. She wiped her mouth. She wasn't a monster. She was a witness, and she had been fed. She turned to face Silas. He immediately stopped laughing. He actually took a step back. The guard, still standing, raised his rifle, but his hands were shaking. Jace scrambled to his feet and grabbed the backpack. "The relic now!" he yelled, tossing the bag to Vesper. She caught it out of the air and sprinted for the main console. "Stop her!" Silas screamed. The guard opened fire, but Vesper dodged, sliding neatly under the console desk. She slammed the relic onto the interface port. At the same time, Jace dove for the manual override controls on the far wall. "Mara!" Jace shouted into his comms. "We need the signal, now!" "It's incoming!" Mara's voice screamed back. Outside the tower, a small, beat-up drone shot out from an alleyway, carrying a signal booster the size of a suitcase. Mara didn't even try to land it. She flew it like a missile, slamming the drone directly into the main broadcast dish on the side of the tower. Boom! The impact shook the entire building. The control room lurched sideways, and ceiling panels rained down around them as alarms started blaring. Jace grabbed a handful of fiber optic cables that were now dangling from an exposed wall panel. The blast had severed the main line to the dish. "I lost the uplink!" Vesper yelled from the console. "The connection's cut!" "I'm fixing it!" Jace roared back. He didn't have tools. He didn't have time to splice anything. He grabbed the two severed ends of the main data trunk, thick cables pulsing with high-voltage data. He ripped the plastic insulation off with his teeth, spitting it onto the floor. Then he took the bare copper wires in his bare hands. "Jace!" Vesper screamed. He jammed the wires together. White-hot agony shot up his arms. The voltage seized his muscles, locking his hands around the connection. He had become the bridge. He was the circuit. "Upload it!" Jace screamed through clenched teeth, smoke starting to rise from his gloves. "Upload the damn truth!" Vesper slammed her hand down on the relic. She poured her memories into the machine, not holding anything back. She gave it everything. The signing of the treaty, the cages, the look on Voss's face, the shame, the fear, the hunger. The truth cascaded into the transmitter. Jace screamed as the energy surged through him, and then there was silence. Outside, the giant screens all over the city changed. The smiling face of Director Voss vanished. In its place, a massive hologram flickered to life, projecting out over the entire city. It wasn't just a flat image. It was a memory. It had depth. It had feeling. Every single person in the crowd below suddenly felt a chill run down their spine. They felt the phantom sensation of a cold metal collar closing around their own neck. They saw the room. They saw the alien overlord. They saw Voss, their director, standing right there. They heard his voice, amplified to a thunderous boom. "Refugees are a resource. Why waste them on freedom when we can harvest them for profit?" They saw him sign the paper. They saw the cages. They saw the blood drains. Then the image shifted, showing a schematic of Voss's brain with puppet strings attached. "Democracy is messy," his voice echoed. "We simply ensure the correct choices are made." The hologram just hung there in the air, undeniable. It carried the psychic weight of the relic. You couldn't look away, and you couldn't call it a fake. You could feel the truth of it in your very bones. Back in the control room, the connection died, and Jace collapsed, his hands badly burned, his body shaking. Vesper was there in an instant, catching him before he could hit the floor. Silas stood by the window, staring out at the city, his face pale. Below, the political chanting had stopped completely. There was a dead silence that stretched for 10 long seconds, a silence heavy with the crushing realization of a betrayal so deep it shattered their entire world. Then a new sound began to rise. It wasn't a chant. It was a roar of pure, unfiltered fury. Down in the square, the massive crowd turned. They didn't turn on the aliens. They turned on the stage. They rushed the podium where the real Voss was standing, frozen in confusion. Security barriers snapped like twigs. The police, confused and horrified by what they had just felt, lowered their shields and let them pass. Silas turned away from the window and looked at Jace and Vesper. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "You broke the game," he said softly. He reached into his jacket. Vesper tensed, moving to stand in front of Jace. But Silas didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a small remote. "If we can't control the narrative," Silas said, "we delete the archives." He pressed the button. A deep, subsonic thump shook the floor beneath them. "The failsafe," Jace gasped, clutching his burned hands. Deep in the basement of the tower and in 3 other data centers across the city, thermite charges detonated. The evidence, the servers, the hard copies, the backups, the financial trails, it was all melting into worthless slag. A new alarm began to wail. "Alert! Terrorist attack in progress. Suspects identified. Jace Wren, Vesper Unit 734. Kill on sight." Silas smiled. "The truth is out there," he said, "but the proof is gone, and now you're the terrorists who bombed the election tower." He walked calmly to his private elevator. "Run, little mice," Silas said. "The whole galaxy is coming for you." The elevator doors slid shut. Jace struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on Vesper. "We have to go," he rasped. "The roof. Mara." They limped toward the stairs. Below them, the city was erupting in flames. The truth was spreading like a virus, but the lie was already pulling on its boots to stomp it out. They had won the battle for the night, but they had just started a much bigger war. A lopsided ship cut a jagged line through the blackness of space, trailing static and exhaust as it fled the burning airspace of Meridian. Inside, the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a submarine that has dived way too deep. Marquest kept the engines running hot, her hands a blur over the navigation controls, plotting a course that looked like a drunken scribble across the star charts. Imagine being so allergic to light that a simple lamp feels like staring into the sun. Now imagine choosing to stand in that light, forcing yourself to endure the agony, just to prove you won't be broken anymore. If you've ever felt like the world was designed to keep you in the dark, then you need to hear Vesper's story. She stood in the ship's galley, her hand trembling just a little as she cranked up the lights. The murky 5% glow that felt like home to her biology was torture for the humans on board, so she turned the dial. 10%, 15. She winced, the crimson rings around her pupils flaring as they shrank to pinpricks. Her pale, almost glowing skin seemed to drink the light instead of reflecting it. But she didn't turn it down. She held her ground, her jaw set like granite. "You're hurting yourself," Jace said, his voice soft. Vesper didn't even look at him. "Getting stronger is supposed to hurt, Jace. If I'm going to live out here, I can't let a light bulb be my cage." With a deep breath, she cranked it to 20%. A single tear escaped, and she swiped it away with an angry flick of her wrist. Then she turned to face him, standing tall. The cowering creature from the tower was gone. The gray cloak she used to hide in was replaced by a flight suit she'd found. It was too big in the shoulders, but she wore it like a coat of armor. "And stop looking at me like that," she said, her voice sharp. "Like what?" Jace asked. "With that face. The one that says, 'Oh, that poor little thing.' The one that wants to wrap me in a blanket and put me back in a box." "I'm done with boxes, Jace. Even the ones built out of kindness." Jace was taken aback by the steel in her voice. It wasn't the hiss of a trapped animal anymore. It was the quiet confidence of an equal. "I just don't want you to get burned," he said. "I'll burn a little," Vesper shot back, crossing her arms. "And then I'll heal. I'll get tougher. That's how it works, right? You humans get scars. I'm just growing mine." She walked over, grabbed a mug of coffee, and took a sip. She grimaced at the bitterness, but then, just to prove a point, took another long drink. Just then, their pilot Mara's voice crackled over the ship's intercom. "Hey, runaways, you might want to get up here. We just crossed into the Twilight sector, and I'm picking something up." Jace and Vesper rushed to the cockpit. Mara had the transmission playing on the main speakers, a messy jumble of news reports, emergency signals, and coded corporate messages. The escape from the Meridian Tower wasn't just a story. It was a firestorm. Riots were breaking out. The company's director was in the hospital. Their stock was crashing. But then, a darker signal sliced through the static, a scrambled message on a repeating loop. "Asset Recovery Team Alpha. Destination, Moon of Ixion. The refinery. Secure the prime key. Initiate Protocol Eternity. Use the blood reserves. Burn the rest." Vesper froze. "Ixion," she whispered. "You know that place?" Mara asked. "It's a dead moon," Vesper said, her voice distant. "On the edge of my home system. My people stay away. They say the gravity is all wrong, that the tides there can tear a ship to pieces." "Protocol Eternity," Jace repeated, his brow furrowed. "That sounds final." Vesper stared at the star map, and suddenly it all clicked into place. They're not just hiding evidence, she realized. They're falling back to the source, the refinery. That's where they make it. "Make what?" Jace asked. Vesper turned to look at him, her eyes dark with a terrible understanding. "The blood, Jace. They didn't just sell us as exotic pets. That was just the cover story. The real product is in our veins. Our blood stabilizes neurochemistry. It makes people compliant, docile, addicted. But if you refine it, if you concentrate it..." She paused, the full horror of the truth washing over her. "It stops cellular decay. It doesn't just make you calm," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It makes you young." Jace felt his own blood run cold. Immortality. That was the secret. Not cheap labor, not political control. It was about bottling eternal life, distilled from the veins of an entire species, and selling it to the richest monsters in the galaxy. "Protocol Eternity," Jace breathed. "They're going to erase the entire program. They'll destroy every last trace of evidence, every living subject, just to protect their formula. And they're going to keep the prime key," Vesper added, "the master code. As long as they have that, they can start this all over again whenever they want." Mara looked from one to the other. "A trip to Ixion is a one-way ticket," she warned. "Those gravity storms will turn this ship into scrap metal." Jace looked at Vesper, expecting to see fear, the same trembling victim he'd rescued from that apartment. Instead, he saw a warrior. Vesper leaned over the console and punched in the coordinates for the dead moon. "Then fly carefully, Mara," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "We have a refinery to burn." In that moment, Jace realized he'd had it all wrong. He wasn't her savior. He wasn't her protector. He was her witness. His job wasn't to shield her from the world, but to stand right beside her and hand her the matches. Love wasn't a rescue mission. It was a partnership in the darkness. Ixion was a beautiful nightmare. The moon was trapped in a cosmic tug-of-war between a gas giant and a black hole, and its surface was a hellscape of razor-sharp ice and geysers of liquid methane. The gravity was a living thing, pulling you down and sideways all at once. As their ship descended, it shook so violently it felt like it would tear apart. "I can't land at the facility," Mara shouted over the storm. "The wind shear will rip us to shreds. I have to drop you in the canyons." "Drop us?" Jace yelled, hanging on for dear life. "Low-altitude jump," Mara screamed back. "About 30 feet. You'll have to trust your grav chutes." The ramp hissed open, revealing a howling vortex of ice and wind that sounded like a million souls screaming. Vesper stood at the edge, unafraid. She looked back at Jace, a fierce grin on her face. "Trust the fall!" she yelled. And they jumped. The grav chutes deployed with a gut-wrenching jolt, slowing them down just enough to not be pulp, but not nearly enough for a soft landing. They slammed into a deep snowdrift at the bottom of a ravine. Jace groaned, the absolute cold already biting through his thermal suit. But Vesper was already on her feet. Here, in the weird, shifting gravity, she moved with an unearthly grace. She leaped from one ice spire to another, scouting ahead. "This way," she signaled. "The refinery is just ahead." They navigated through a series of ice caves whose walls were like polished mirrors, creating a disorienting, beautiful maze. And then they saw it, a massive black structure embedded in the ice, a scar of perfect engineering on a chaotic world. Jace didn't bother with subtlety. He planted a shaped charge Mara had given him, and the main door blew inward. They stepped inside. This wasn't a prison. It was a factory of horrors. Giant glass tanks lined the walls, each filled with a glowing crimson fluid, and floating inside each one were the pale, drained bodies of her people. Jace felt a wave of nausea. He'd seen some dark things in his life, but this was an industrial slaughterhouse pretending to be a laboratory. Vesper walked slowly down the aisle, her face an unreadable mask of grief and fury. She reached out and touched the cold glass of one tank. "They're not dead," she whispered. "They're being used as batteries." They found the central control room, a circular platform hanging over a massive, glowing vat of the finished serum. And standing there, waiting for them, was their old friend Silas, the handler. He looked terrible. His suit was ripped, his face was bruised, and he clutched a heavy pistol in one hand and a small data drive in the other. "The prime key," Silas said, holding up the drive. "The last copy in existence." He stood dangerously close to the edge of the platform. "I'll give you this, you've been a real pain. Most of my pets just run and hide. You actually bite back." "It's over, Silas," Jace said, raising his own gun. "The whole galaxy knows what you've done." Silas just laughed. "The galaxy forgets. They'll be angry for a month, maybe 2. Then they'll start getting old again. They'll get sick, and they'll come crawling back to us, begging for this cure. As long as I have this key and this facility, we'll always win." Vesper took a step forward. She didn't snarl or show her claws. She just walked toward him with the unnerving calm of a judge approaching the bench. "Put the key down, Silas," she said. He laughed again. "Or what? You'll hiss at me?" He locked his eyes on her, focusing all his cruel power into a single command. He spoke the control phrase, the one that was supposed to turn her bones to jelly, the one that had broken her before. "Subjugation is peace," he said in her native tongue, the words perfectly pronounced. Vesper didn't even flinch. She just took another step. Silas frowned, confused. He yelled it this time. "Subjugation is peace!" Vesper stopped just 3 feet from him and tilted her head. "That doesn't work on me anymore," she said simply. "It has to," he sputtered. "It's hardwired into your brain." "No," Vesper corrected him. "It was wired into my fear. I obeyed because I believed I was broken. I believed I belonged in a cage." She gave him a small, sharp smile she'd learned from the humans. "But then Jace told me a story about rain, and I realized something important, Silas." She took the final step, closing the distance between them. "I'm not your pet. I am a weather event, and you can't put a collar on a hurricane." In a panic, Silas swung his pistol toward Jace. "If I can't break you, I'll break him." He fired. The shot hit Jace in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. He crashed to the floor, his weapon clattering across the grating. "Jace!" Vesper screamed. In a flash, Silas was on him, hauling Jace up by the collar and dragging him to the platform's edge, dangling him right over a vat of bubbling, superheated serum. "Stop!" Silas roared at Vesper. "Take one more step and I'll drop him. He'll boil alive." Vesper froze solid. Silas, panting with blood streaming from his nose, laid out his terms. "It's the same old deal, pet. The one you know so well. You get on your knees. You submit. You let me put this collar back on you, and I let him live. Your life for his. That's what love is, right? A sacrifice." Jace, struggling with his one good hand, gripped Silas's arm. "Don't do it, Vesper. Don't you dare." Vesper's eyes met Jace's. She could see the agony on his face, but beneath it, she saw the unyielding command in his eyes. "Do not kneel." She glanced back at Silas and saw the trap for what it was. The oldest trick in the entire universe. Use love like a leash. Turn their greatest strength into their biggest weakness. Vesper shut her eyes for just a moment. When they opened again, they were crystal clear. "No," she said. Silas blinked, stunned. "What?" "I will not kneel," Vesper stated plainly, "and I'm not going to kill you either." "Then he dies," Silas shrieked. "No," Vesper said again, reaching into her pocket. But she didn't pull out a gun or a knife. She pulled out the relic. With a sharp crack, she slammed it onto the platform's metal railing. "You see, Denny, the relic was never just a projector. It's an amplifier. It takes all the raw emotion in a room, the fear, the greed, the hatred, and it broadcasts it." But this time, Vesper wasn't about to broadcast a memory. She was going to broadcast the now. Reaching out with her mind, she connected to the device and pulled Silas right into the stream. She didn't target his body. She targeted his very frequency. The air in the refinery began to shimmer. A holographic field erupted from the relic, washing over all of them. And in an instant, Silas wasn't holding Jace anymore. He was holding his own truth. The relic amplified his deepest intentions. It took his internal monologue, all his greed, his cruelty, his absolute chilling disregard for life, and screamed it across every emergency channel in the sector. "They will get old," his voice boomed, 1,000 times louder than before, echoing off the icy walls. "They will get sick, and they will always come crawling back to us." That voice echoed in the cockpits of the conquered fleet ships just warping into the system. It echoed through the newsrooms back on Meridian. It was a confession, ripped straight from his soul and plastered across the heavens for everyone to see. Silas staggered back, clutching his head as the feedback loop of his own malice overwhelmed him. The relic forced him to see himself for what he truly was, small, cruel, and utterly empty. He screamed, his grip on Jace finally breaking. Jace scrambled away from the edge, rolling to safety. Silas crumpled to his knees, clawing at his ears. "Make it stop! The noise!" Vesper calmly walked over to the data drive he'd dropped, the prime key. She picked it up. She didn't give a speech. She didn't gloat. She tossed it straight into the vat of boiling serum. It sizzled, melted, and disappeared in a puff of acrid smoke. "It's done," Vesper said. She kicked the relic off the railing, shattering the connection. Silas collapsed, unconscious from the neural shock. The entire facility began to groan and shake. Its structural integrity, already weakened by the gravity storms and now the relic's energy blast, was failing. "We have to go!" Jace yelled, clutching his bleeding shoulder. They ran. They burst out onto the frozen ice fields just as the refinery's roof caved in, burying the tanks, the serum, and Silas under a mountain of black ice. They found shelter in a crystalline cave as the tempest raged outside, the northern lights of the gas giant above painting the ice in shimmering waves of green and violet. Jace slid down the cave wall, his face pale with pain. Vesper was at his side in an instant, tearing a strip from her flight suit to create a makeshift bandage for his wound. "You didn't kneel," Jace whispered, gritting his teeth as she pulled the fabric tight. Vesper looked at him, her hands covered in his blood. But for the first time, there was no hunger in her eyes, only tenderness. "I realized something," she said softly. "If I had knelt, I would have saved your life. But I would have lost us. I would have been his pet again. And you would have been the reason. You would have grown to hate yourself for it. She finished tying the knot and gently brushed the hair from his damp forehead. We aren't saviors, Jace. We're just survivors, and survivors don't make deals with devils. In the strange, shifting light of the aurora, Jace looked at her. She didn't seem alien. She didn't look like some monster. She looked like the future. He reached up with his good hand and touched her cheek. I love you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not the asset, not the queen. Just you. Vesper leaned into his touch, a silent acceptance. And I love you, Jace Wren. The man who builds domes. They held each other in the quiet dark as the world outside tore itself apart, only to begin putting itself back together. The end didn't come with a bang, but with the fall of a gavel. The refinery's destruction and the broadcast of Silas's confession was the final nail in the coffin. The reformist coalition in the Meridian Assembly pushed for an emergency vote. With the immortality scheme laid bare, Heliocorp's political shield vanished. Executives were arrested in their gleaming high-rise offices. Director Voss's election was annulled, citing biological tampering. But justice is a machine, and a machine needs fuel. Jace and Vesper returned to Meridian. They didn't sneak back in. They flew their lopsided ship, the Comet, right into the main docking bay and surrendered to the authorities. It was Jace's idea. If we run, we look guilty, he had argued. But if we walk right in, we force a trial, and a trial requires evidence. Jace was promptly arrested for theft, corporate sabotage, and the unauthorized handling of hazardous biologicals. He was put in a holding cell. But Vesper wasn't put in a cage. She walked, unmasked and wearing a simple white tunic, straight into the assembly hall. She stood in the very center of the chamber, surrounded by the hundreds of delegates who had once voted to declare her legal property. And then she testified. She didn't use the relic this time. She used her voice. She told them about the dark boat. She told them about the collar. She told them about the blood. She told them about a human named Jace Wren, who had offered her his wrist and asked for nothing in return. She demanded recognition, not as royalty, and not as a victim. I am a witness, she announced to the silent hall. And I am watching you. The vote was a landslide. The personhood amendment passed. The pet classification was officially struck from the law books. Then Vesper played her final card. She refused to leave the podium until Jace Wren was released and granted a full and complete pardon. She held the entire assembly hostage with nothing more than her presence. The media went wild with it. The vampire queen and the engineer. The optics of keeping her savior locked in a prison cell were impossible to maintain. 3 days later, Jace's cell door slid open. 6 months later, the planet of Sylar Prime was still a twilight world, but its cities were stirring back to life. Refugees were finally coming home. Jace stood on a balcony overlooking the capital's obsidian spires. The sun, a dim red dwarf, was rising, bathing the world in a soft, bruised purple light. It wasn't bright, but it was warm. He held 2 mugs of coffee, real coffee, smuggled in by Mara Kest, who was at that very moment down at the spaceport, haggling over landing fees. Vesper stepped out onto the balcony to join him. She wore a dress made of a shimmering, light-absorbing fabric that seemed to change color as she moved. Her skin had a healthy, pearl-like glow. She looked taller, stronger. She took one of the coffee mugs from Jace. "You're staring," she said. "I'm admiring the architecture," Jace lied with a smile. Vesper laughed. It was a real laugh, throaty and a little unpracticed. She walked to the railing and gazed out at the sunrise. She didn't even flinch. She had spent months carefully training her eyes, building up her tolerance. She could stand in the light now. Jace came and stood beside her. He didn't put a protective arm around her. He just leaned against the railing, their shoulders barely touching. "So," Jace said, "the council wants you to run for high witness." Vesper blew on her coffee. "I told them no." "Why?" "Because I'm busy," she said. "I have a new project." "Oh?" Jace asked. "What is it?" Vesper turned to face him, her dark, crimson-ringed eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'm opening a school," she said. "A school for what?" "For humans," she replied. "To teach them how to smile without showing quite so many teeth. And for Solari," she added, "to teach them that food and friend are two different categories." She paused, her expression softening. "And I want you to build it. I want a dome. A dome where the light is always gentle and the rain falls every evening at 6 o'clock. Jace felt a lump form in his throat. "I can do that," he said, his voice a little thick. "I can definitely do that." Vesper reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together. There was no desperate grip, no trembling fear. There was only the comfortable, solid weight of a choice that had been made and kept. She looked toward the horizon, where the red sun was climbing higher, pushing back the shadows. "We changed it, Jace," she whispered. "The world. We actually did." Jace nodded. "We did." Vesper looked at him, her face fierce and happy. "And no one," she said, squeezing his hand, "ever gets called pet again." Jace smiled, raising his coffee mug in a silent toast to the twilight. "No one," he promised. They stood there together in the gathering light, two survivors on a balcony at the edge of the universe, watching the darkness retreat, one sunrise at a time.